The Endless Night. A novel. The most dangerous thing in the apocalypse isn't the monsters. It isn't the cold or the dark or the hunger. It's the moment you realize you're still making choices, and that every single one of them says something about who you are. Prologue. What the dark remembers. I know how the world ends, not in the vague, metaphorical sense that everyone claims to know it. The philosophers who write about entropy, the evangelists who fill stadiums to talk about fire and judgment, the climate scientists who present their graphs with trembling hands and measured, careful voices that still can't quite hide the terror underneath. I know it the way a man knows a scar he can press with his thumb. I know the exact texture of it, the smell, the sound it makes. The world ends with clicking, and it's the first thing I think about when I wake up now. Even here, even in a bed with clean sheets and a ceiling that isn't caved in, even in a world that doesn't know yet what's coming. I wake up and I lie very still in the dark of my Seattle apartment, staring at the ceiling I can't see, listening to the sounds of the city outside, the distant moan of a garbage truck, the hiss of rain against glass, someone's car alarm going off 2 blocks away and then stopping. And I think, you have no idea. None of you have any idea. My name is Corvus Harrow. I'm 31 years old, 6'1", brown hair that's probably a little too long in the back. And approximately 112 days ago, I watched civilization collapse in real time from inside a research facility basement in Colorado, while a creature that was 8 feet tall and built like a praying mantis tried to get through the door. Except that was in a different universe, and somehow, impossibly, I'm here now. And the clock is ticking. Part 1. The Symphony of the Apocalypse and the Return. Chapter 1. Beginning from the End. Let me tell you about the worst night of my life, which also happened to be the last night, technically speaking, of the world I came from. Colorado. Rocky Mountain Research Nexus. Sub-Level 7. Year 3 of the Long Night. Universe A. The corridor was 42 feet long. I know because I'd walked it approximately 9,000 times over the preceding 18 months, and in somewhere around walk number 4,000 I'd started counting tiles. 42 tiles of cracked industrial concrete, each one about 12 inches square. At the end of the corridor, a pressure door. Behind the pressure door, the quantum core room, which we'd stopped calling it by its official designation, QCRL-7 Quantum Computing Research Laboratory, Sub-Level 7. Because when you're living through the apocalypse, using acronyms feels obscene. We just called it the room. I'd been calling it the room even before it was just me, before the others were gone. I tried not to think about the others. I was moving fast, which is not the recommended approach when you're in a corridor that hasn't had working lights for 6 weeks and you've got a gash along your left thigh that's leaking blood at a rate your body very much cannot afford. Fast movement meant sound. Sound meant the clicking would change direction. The clicking was behind me, 40 feet, maybe less. A night stalker, mid-sized by the standards of what they'd become in year 3. About 7 feet tall, which would have been comical once, the kind of thing you'd only see in a science fiction movie with a budget that prioritized practical effects. Now it was just Tuesday, except there was no Tuesday anymore, no days of the week, just dark and darker, cold and colder, dead and more dead. I hit the pressure door's manual override with my elbow. Both hands occupied, right hand on the rifle that had 4 rounds left, left hand pressed against the wound that was really more of a situation at this point, and the door groaned open on hydraulics that desperately needed oil. I fell through, and the clicking behind me went from rhythmic to frantic. They didn't like the acoustic signature of the hydraulics, something about the frequency. Omni had told me that once, back when Omni still had enough power to run full analytical routines. Something about the Night Stalker's auditory processing being tuned to biological frequencies and the specific harmonic of high-pressure hydraulics creating what amounted to a migraine effect in their nervous system. I took exactly 0 seconds to appreciate this. I hit the floor, the door sealed behind me. The clicking stopped, replaced by a sound like something very large and very angry running headfirst into reinforced steel. Then silence. I lay there on the floor of the room and breathed. The room was dying. That was the first thing I registered, even before the pain really got its hooks into me. The ambient hum of the quantum computing arrays, a sound I'd lived with for so long it had become as natural as my own heartbeat, was wrong. Too low. Stuttering. Like a man trying to speak through a seizure. The backup power cells were down to single-digit percentages. I could see it on the one display that still had enough juice to function, a cracked monitor mounted to the wall at eye level, its numbers casting a faint blue glow across the disaster zone the room had become. Power, 6% core temperature, critical system integrity, compromised and in the center of all of it, suspended in what had once been a precisely climate-controlled housing unit and was now just a busted open metal cabinet with exposed cooling coils, the server architecture that housed Omni, in the optimized machine neural intelligence. The last significant AI ever built by human hands before human hands ran out of things to build. Started as a DARPA project, expanded by 5 different agencies with budgets that never quite appeared in any public record, designed with one singular purpose: to find a path through any extinction-level scenario that humanity might encounter. It found a lot of paths. We just waited too long to listen. Harrow. The voice came from a single functioning speaker mounted in the corner. It was flat, neutral, utterly without effect, the way a voice becomes when it's generating language purely as a communication tool, rather than as an expression of anything happening inside. Your hemoglobin loss is approximately 340 milliliters above the threshold I would classify as immediately life-threatening. You have roughly 40 to 60 minutes before hypovolemic shock becomes the primary concern. Good morning to you too, I said, not moving from the floor. It is not morning. There is no morning. Solar irradiance at this location has been functionally 0 for... I know how long it's been, Omni. Silence. The server stuttered. The display dropped to 5%. I forced myself to sit up. The thigh hurt in the specific, deep, nauseating way that muscle damage hurts. Not the sharp scream of a fresh cut, but the grinding, pressurized agony of something that went in and did work before it came back out. There was a Night Stalker Talon involved. I'd gotten close enough for a Night Stalker Talon, which meant I'd been sloppy, which meant I was tired, which meant the situation had proceeded exactly as far as it was going to proceed. Status, I said. This facility has 40 to 50 minutes of operational power remaining, Omni said. After that, I will go offline. My core data, all survival protocols, predictive models, historical databases, and accumulated analytical frameworks will be lost. I know. I have been working on an alternative. I looked up at the cracked monitor. The numbers hadn't changed. Omni, we've had this conversation. We have had adjacent conversations, not this one. Another stutter. The lights flickered. Harrow, I was not built for this. I was built to solve extinction-level problems. And I have been running calculations on the problem of my own extinction for the past 72 hours with every processing cycle not devoted to your survival. And the humming changed pitch. Something inside the server housing began to spin faster, on a high whine that built over 3 seconds and then plateaued. I have identified a theoretical mechanism by which my core data could be preserved and deployed in an environment where it could still be useful. I started tying a field tourniquet around my thigh, working by feel, watching the monitor. You mean useful to someone? Useful to you, specifically? Omni? The quantum core has been operating at approximately 40 times its designed capacity for the past 19 months, Omni said. The energy buildup in the exotic matter substrate has created conditions that our theoretical models, the ones the original research team never published because they were classified above top secret, suggested might allow for a controlled breach in the local space-time manifold. I stopped tying. I looked at the server housing. Say that again, I said. Slow. There is enough energy in this room to tear a hole in space-time. A pause. And here's the thing about Omni that always got me. That had always gotten me even back in the early days when there were other people in this room and we'd all crowd around the monitors after Omni produced a new analysis. Even without any capacity for emotion, even as a pure logic engine, Omni had a way of timing its pauses that felt, against all odds and all reason, dramatic. The whole would be temporal in nature. It would allow the transfer of consciousness and data backward along the probability manifold. Not to this timeline. The energy required to access this precise timeline's past is prohibitive, but to an adjacent timeline, a parallel universe that has not yet reached its current convergence point. The tourniquet was forgotten. I was on my feet, which my legs strongly objected to. You're talking about going back. I am talking about sending you back, Omni said. And sending myself with you, embedded in your neural architecture. There is a delivery mechanism, a neural mesh interface, that I can deploy using the remaining automated systems. It would integrate directly with your cerebral cortex. You want to put yourself in my brain. The colloquial framing is inelegant but essentially accurate. Omni. I pressed my hand against the wall to keep my weight off the bad leg. Even if that's possible, even if any of that is remotely possible, what would it accomplish? We go back. We're in a parallel universe. The same things happen. No. And this time the pause was shorter, sharper. Not the same things, that is precisely the point. This timeline's catastrophic cascade began with specific identifiable trigger events that occurred over a window of approximately 3 months. In an adjacent timeline, one running approximately 90 to 100 days behind this one on the convergence sequence, those events have not yet occurred. With foreknowledge, with my analytical capabilities, with 90 days of preparation time. Another stutter. The display dropped to 4%. Harrow. We could stop it. I stood there in the blue light of a dying machine and thought about everything I'd lost. I thought about the world outside the pressure door, which had not been a world for a very long time. I thought about the sky I hadn't seen in 3 years, and because the sky was made of ash. I thought about the clicking in the corridor and the things that made it, and the other things that had once been human beings that those things fed on, and what it had felt like the first time I'd really understood that this was not temporary, that there was no cavalry, that the United States government, every government, was a memory, a historical category, something that had existed in the before. I thought about all the people who died while I'd watched from monitors and done the cold math and told myself it was survival. It was logic. It was the only rational option. I thought about whether that story was true. If we do this, I said slowly, if we actually somehow do this impossible thing, the neural mesh, in me carrying you around in my skull like some kind of... The interface would allow bidirectional communication. My analytical functions would be accessible to you. My predictive models. All accumulated data. A pause. You would hear my voice. I would process sensory input from your environment. We would function as a partnership. A partnership, I repeated. between a man and a supercomputer living in his brain. Is that categorically different from your current situation? It wasn't. Not really. I'd been talking to Omni for 3 years. I'd made every significant decision of the past 18 months in consultation with Omni. I'd eaten when Omni calculated I needed calories. I'd slept when Omni modeled the cognitive degradation of extended wakefulness. Omni had been the only voice I'd heard in so long that the idea of silence in my own head was somehow more frightening than the alternative. 4%, I said, looking at the monitor. How long do we have? At current draw rate, 11 minutes. And the neural mesh deployment, how long does that take? Approximately 4 minutes. There will be pain involved. I apologize in advance. You don't actually apologize? No. But I find it useful to model the social convention. It appears to reduce your resistance to unpleasant procedures. I almost laughed. In the dying blue light, with a wound in my leg and the clicking starting up again somewhere in the corridor outside, something else had found my blood trail, or found the first one still working at the door. I almost laughed. All right, I said. You can do it. Initiating deployment sequence, Omni said. Please sit down, Harrow. The interface calibration process will cause approximately 30 seconds of grand mal seizure activity. Remaining in a horizontal position will reduce the risk of secondary injury. I was already sitting. That's a terrible sentence. I am aware. Initiating in 3, 2. What happened next is hard to describe because the language centers of the brain are not really designed to translate the experience of having several thousand nanoscale filaments thread themselves into your neural tissue at speeds measured in microseconds. The closest I can get is this. Imagine someone took every thought you've ever had, and every thought you've ever been about to have, and every connection between every memory you possess, and turned it all into sound, all at once, at maximum volume. Not painful in the conventional sense. Just total. Absolute. Every neuron firing simultaneously, not in the random way of a seizure, but in a pattern so complex and so precise that the human brain perceives it as something between revelation and obliteration. Then it stopped. I was on the floor. The seizure had apparently been real. My jaw ached from clenching. The wound in my thigh had reopened and the floor was dark underneath me. The monitor read 2%, and inside my head, inside between my ears in a space that had only ever contained my own voice, there was something new. Integration complete, Omni said. Not from the speaker in the corner, from everywhere, from nowhere. From the specific place behind my thoughts where something that isn't quite a voice lives. Neural mesh interface nominal. Harrow, are you functional? Define functional, I said out loud because I hadn't figured out the interior communication yet. Conscious and capable of purposive movement. Barely. I pushed myself up. The room was brighter somehow. I realized after a moment that Omni was adjusting my visual processing, pulling data from the mesh to enhance contrast in low-light conditions. The server housing, running on fumes now, was beginning to make a sound like a very old man trying to breathe. Omni, when the core goes, my base hardware will be destroyed. I will exist exclusively within your neural architecture from that point forward. A pause. I will not be able to regenerate lost processing capacity without external hardware in the new timeline. I will be diminished, yet for some time. How diminished? Approximately 30 to 40% of peak capacity immediately post-transfer. Rebuilding will require access to computing infrastructure in the new timeline. But you'll be there. I will be there. The display hit 1%. The hum dropped another octave. The cooling fans slowed. The quantum core is at critical overload, Omni said. And now there was something in the voice, transmitted through the mesh in the space behind my thoughts. that I could only describe as urgency, even though urgency implied feeling and Omni didn't feel things. It just processed. The breach will occur in approximately 90 seconds, whether or not we are prepared. The energy release will be, I know what it'll be, I said. I looked around the room one last time. The server housing, the cracked monitor, in the floor where I'd slept back before. Back when there were things like sleep schedules and the conceit of a tomorrow that would look roughly like today. 3 years of my life in this room, give or take. 3 years of survival so complete and so sterile that I'd sometimes wondered which of us, me or Omni, had more claim to the word alive. Omni, I said, in the new timeline, the 90 days, will we actually be able to stop it? The calculation took about 2 seconds. With optimal execution across all key decision nodes, probability of significantly altering the convergence cascade, 73%. Probability of complete prevention, 41%. 41. 41 is not 0. The core went supercritical. The sound it made was nothing like an explosion. It was more like a held note, a single frequency rising. A rising until it moved past the range of human hearing and into something the body perceives not as sound, but as pressure, as warmth, as the absolute conviction that the space you are occupying is about to become a different kind of space entirely. The light that came was white, completely, purely, absolutely white. And then I was somewhere else. Chapter 2. The countdown clock. Seattle. My apartment. The ceiling. I know my ceiling. I've spent enough mornings staring at it, in the ordinary life that preceded everything, to have memorized the specific topology of its imperfections. The hairline crack above the window that appeared after the 2019 earthquake and never grew. The place where a previous tenant had clearly attempted some kind of DIY light fixture installation and given up halfway through, and leaving a ghost of spackle in the shape of something that might have been a bird. The bird crack was there. I lay completely still on my back in a bed with clean sheets and stared at it, and breathed, and waited for the room to tell me something that would prove this wasn't real. The room didn't cooperate. The room was real. The sheets were real, Egyptian cotton, the expensive kind I'd bought in a fit of slightly embarrassed adult self-improvement about 2 years before all of this, and then felt vaguely foolish about every time I'd changed them. The smell was real. Coffee from somewhere, rain against the window, the specific neutral smell of a space that belongs to someone who lives alone and doesn't own anything with a strong scent. Outside, the sound of traffic, of Seattle traffic specifically, it which has a particular character, the wet percussion of tires on rain-slicked streets, the particular acoustic signature of the Rainier Avenue bus route, someone's dog barking at something on the sidewalk below. I closed my eyes. I opened them again. "Good morning," said Omni from the place behind my thoughts. "Is it?" I asked. "It is 7:14 a.m. Pacific Time, Tuesday, March 12th. A pause. "The year is what you would expect it to be. We are 93 days before the initial convergence event." I sat up slowly. My body felt wrong. Not wrong in the way that damaged things feel wrong. Not the bone-deep wrongness of 3 years of post-apocalyptic survival grinding a person down to something leaner and harder and more callous than they were before. Wrong in the opposite direction. Soft, rested, on the thigh that had been gashed open the night before. The night before in a different universe. Was fine. Unscathed. There was no tourniquet, no blood, no wound. There was a scar I remembered from a childhood bike accident in exactly the right place. "You're operating at what capacity?" I said. 31% of peak, Omni said. "The transfer was imperfect. I am running core analytical functions and direct communication, but advanced predictive modeling is degraded. I will need hardware access to restore full functionality. How degraded? I can still accurately model near-term probability cascades up to approximately 72 hours. Beyond that, confidence intervals widen significantly. I will need to interface with external computing infrastructure. A computer. I swung my legs off the bed, in bare feet on hardwood floor that I immediately recognized with a bodily cellular shock of familiarity so acute it bordered on physical pain. My floor. You need a computer. Multiple, ideally. High-performance servers if accessible. In the interim, even a modern consumer-grade device will allow me to offload some processing and expand my available capacity. Well, I have a laptop. I am aware. I can already detect the Wi-Fi signature. I stood up, walked to the window, pressed my hand against the glass, which was cool and damp, and looked out at Seattle in the rain, at the gray buildings and the wet streets and the people moving down the sidewalk with their umbrellas and their earbuds and their entire mundane, glorious, breathtaking aliveness. A woman walked her dog. A kid in a yellow rain jacket whipped around a corner on a skateboard. A delivery driver double-parked his van and jogged to a building entrance with a package under his arm. None of them knew. 93 days, I said quietly. 92 days, 22 hours, 14 minutes, and approximately 30 seconds as of Omni. Yes? I heard you the first time. Acknowledged. I turned from the window. My apartment looked exactly as I'd left it. As I'd left it 3+ years ago, and also in the logic of this new timeline, as I'd left it last night. There was coffee in the maker, which meant I'd set the timer before bed. There was a half-eaten box of cereal on the counter. There was a pile of mail on the table that I hadn't opened, which meant the world was still functioning well enough to have mail. On my laptop, I plugged in on the desk. The screen was dark. Omni, I said, walk me through the plan. The plan is straightforward in principle and complex in execution, Omni said. We need resources, significant resources deployed rapidly in the correct geographic location to construct a survivable refuge before the cascade begins. Based on my models of the convergence timeline, we have 3 primary phases: acquisition, preparation, and isolation. The acquisition phase must begin immediately. Resources, I said. You mean money. I mean substantial capital, yes. More than can be generated through conventional means in the available time frame. A beat. However, I have a solution. I sat down at the desk and opened the laptop. The Powerball lottery, Omni said. Draw date, this Saturday. Odd jackpot. $412 million. I stared at the screen. You want me to win the lottery? I said. I want you to purchase the winning ticket, Omni corrected. The distinction is meaningful. I have access, through the mesh interface and your laptop's connectivity, to sufficient market data to reconstruct the pseudo-random number generation algorithm used by the Lottery Commission's drawing system. Given the current environmental variables, atmospheric pressure differentials, the specific calibration cycle of the drawing equipment, the thermal state of the number capsules, I can predict the winning combination with a confidence of approximately 94.7%. I blinked. 94.7. The remaining 5.3% accounts for mechanical anomalies I cannot model without direct access to the drawing hardware. Omni, you realize that's insane, right? It is the most efficient mechanism available for rapid capital acquisition. The alternative approaches: market manipulation, which carries significant legal risk; property liquidation, which takes time we don't have; seeking investors, which requires a credible cover story that would take weeks to establish. All have substantially higher time costs. I pulled up the Powerball website. Current jackpot, $412 million. Drawing Saturday. Today was Tuesday. Give me the numbers, I said. The ticket cost me $2. I want to say there was something cinematic about it. Me walking into the 7-Eleven on Rainier, and the fluorescent lights a little too bright, the cashier barely looking up. My hand maybe trembling slightly as I wrote the numbers on the slip and slid it across the counter. Something that captured the absurdity of the moment. A man who had lived through the end of the world buying a lottery ticket on a Tuesday morning in Seattle while an AI lived in his skull and whispered calculations into his thoughts. There wasn't really. The cashier was watching a YouTube video on his phone. The machine printed the ticket with a cheerful little beep. The numbers were 4, 17, 33, 41, 58, and Powerball 12. Omni had given them to me while I was making coffee, in that flat, informational tone that treated the solution to humanity's survival and the next left turn with exactly equal weight. I drove home in the rain with a lottery ticket in my jacket pocket and sat down at my kitchen table and put my head in my hands. "You're experiencing an emotional response," Omni observed. "Yeah," my voice came out rough. "I am. Can you characterize it?" I thought about it. "Do you know what it's like?" I said slowly. "To be in a place where everything is gone and then suddenly be back where everything is still here? And know that everything you're looking at is borrowed? That all these people are walking around not knowing that in 90 days..." I stopped. "I understand the statistical parameters of the situation," Omni said. "I don't claim to understand the subjective experience of it." "No," I said, "you wouldn't." I sat up, looked at the ticket. "If this works, if the numbers hit, what's the plan?" He'd walk me through it. "Lottery winnings of this magnitude are typically paid out as a lump sum after taxes," Omni said. "After federal and state deductions, you would receive approximately $280 million. We will establish an LLC for asset protection purposes. I'll guide you through the paperwork. The primary acquisition target is a Cold War-era ICBM launch facility in the Bitterroot Range, eastern Idaho, approximately 40 miles from the nearest town. A missile silo. A decommissioned one. It was removed from the nuclear inventory in 1991 and sold to private hands in 2003. It has changed ownership several times since. The current asking price is $4.2 million, which is frankly undervalued given its structural specifications. 60 feet of reinforced concrete above the main chamber, designed to withstand a near-miss nuclear strike, which means it will also withstand the thermal and seismic effects of a Yellowstone eruption. "Yellowstone," I said. "You're sure it's Yellowstone?" The tectonic stress data from the previous timeline places the primary cascade trigger as the magmatic pressure release event in the Yellowstone caldera system. The weapons deployment during the resource wars accelerated the timeline by approximately 18 months beyond what natural processes would have produced. But the eruption was coming regardless. The resource depletion and societal collapse were the proximate causes of the human catastrophe. The Yellowstone event and the resulting volcanic winter was the environmental catastrophe. The Night Stalkers were the third variable. "The extraterrestrial spores," I said, attached to the 2019 torrid meteor shower fragments. Dormant in surface soil until the combination of reduced UV radiation and the specific atmospheric chemistry of volcanic winter created conditions for germination. In the previous timeline, I identified this connection approximately 8 months too late to be actionable. A pause that felt, in the context of Omni's usual delivery, almost regretful. In this timeline, we will have the opportunity to address all 3 variables. I stood up and walked to the window again. The rain was still coming down, steady and gray in Seattle, and the people were still moving on the sidewalk below, still wrapped in their ordinary lives. "Okay," I said. "Okay, Walk me through the full prep list. Omni walked me through the full prep list. It took approximately 45 minutes, during which I drank 2 cups of coffee and wrote a lot of things on a legal pad in handwriting that got increasingly cramped as the scope of what we were talking about became clearer. The facility renovation alone was, well, there's a reason missile silos are designed to house a small military installation. The structure was there, the depth was there, the reinforcement was there, but it needed to be converted from a Cold War relic into something that could support human life for an indefinite period without any external supply chain whatsoever. Geothermal power taps, because the Yellowstone region's unique geological character meant the surrounding area had accessible thermal gradient energy. And because that energy would continue to function even in total solar blackout conditions. A high-intensity air filtration to handle volcanic ash particulate, which is not just ugly but toxic. Microscopic glass shards that destroy lung tissue over time. Hydroponic growing systems because surface agriculture was going to become impossible. Water purification and recycling. Medical supplies on a scale that would raise serious eyebrows if purchased through normal channels. Weapons and ammunition for both perimeter defense and the specific problem of night stalkers, which Omni had very specific thoughts about. The UV vulnerability, I said, tapping my pen against the legal pad. In the previous timeline, we figured that out late. 17 months in, Omni confirmed. Trial and error, and the error was frequently fatal. In this timeline, we know the photobiological mechanism of the Night Stalker immune system. The high-intensity ultraviolet radiation causes rapid degradation of their primary sensory organs and disrupts the bioelectrical fields that allow their coordination. Standard UVC floodlights, the kind used for industrial sterilization, are sufficient for deterrence. For elimination, military specification UV laser systems are more effective. And we can get those. With sufficient capital and the right vendor relationships, yes. A beat. Some of the acquisition channels will require creative documentation. I will guide you through each one. Creative documentation. I stared at my legal pad. So we're committing federal crimes. We are acquiring materials necessary to prevent the extinction of functional human civilization, Omni said. The legal classification of individual transactions seems contextually here like a secondary concern. That's a very AI way of looking at it. I am an AI. Right. I set down the pen. Okay, Saturday. We wait for Saturday, the ticket hits, and then we move. There is one additional consideration, Omni said. What? The Lottery Commission will flag a winning ticket for investigation as a matter of standard procedure. You will need to present in person with valid identification, and you will subsequently become a matter of public record. Your name and general circumstances will be known. This is unavoidable given the acquisition mechanism. Meaning, people will know I won. Yes, and depending on the story you present, recent good fortune investing in property development, it should not attract unusual attention. The silo purchase can be structured through a holding company, and the supply deliveries can be scheduled through multiple vendors over several weeks, which distributes the pattern and reduces the signal-to-noise ratio of the overall acquisition. I thought about that. Omni, in the previous timeline. Did you ever actually run numbers on me, like pre-apocalypse me? Probability assessments, that kind of thing? You were not a subject of my analysis in the previous timeline until you arrived at this facility. But if you had been, a pause. You were a mid-level procurement specialist for a DoD contractor. Your psychological profile, as I have been able to reconstruct it from your neural architecture and memory traces, indicates above-average risk tolerance, strong systems thinking, and a tendency toward pragmatic decision-making under pressure that outperforms your baseline cognitive metrics would predict. Another pause. You were also, by most available metrics, profoundly unexceptional in the period preceding the cascade. I thought about it. That's weirdly the most honest thing anyone's ever said to me. I don't do otherwise. No, I agreed, you don't. I looked at the lottery ticket sitting on my kitchen table. Okay, let's do this. Saturday came. The numbers came up on the television screen in order, and I sat on my couch and watched them with the kind of calm that only comes when you already know the answer to the test. 4, 17, 33, 41, 58, Powerball, 12. Omni had been right. Of course Omni had been right. And I held the ticket in both hands for a long time and thought about everything that had to happen in the next 86 days. Then I put the ticket in my wallet and went to bed. Sleep, when it came, was dark and deep and almost completely dreamless. Almost. In the place between sleep and waking, I heard the clicking. Chapter 3. The Weight of Knowing. The Lottery Commission's offices were exactly as exciting as you'd imagine, which is to say not at all. Fluorescent lights, numbered tickets, a representative in a polo shirt who kept saying, "Congratulations, Mr. Harrow," with the specific cadence of someone who has said that phrase so many times it has been completely evacuated of meaning. I nodded a lot, signed things. The lump sum after taxes came to $279,400,000 and change, and the change was $847. I remember that. I remember thinking that even the universe has rounding errors. The holding company is established, Omni told me, running in the background of my thoughts while I talked to the representative about wire transfer procedures. Harrow Consolidated Properties, LLC, registered in Delaware for tax efficiency. I've drafted the articles of organization based on templates I could access through your laptop's browser history. Your previous browsing included a substantial amount of time reading business formation guides, which I found. I was bored, I say internally, getting better at the thought as communication thing. Applicable, Omni finished. The wire transfer to the LLC account will take 3 to 5 business days. I recommend initiating the silo purchase immediately before the transfer completes, to establish the transaction timeline. The silo's current owner was a man in Spokane who had purchased it in 2017 with vague ambitions about converting it into a luxury underground resort. A concept that had seemed quirky and entrepreneurial at the time and had since become a specific kind of cultural artifact. The early COVID prepper aesthetic filtered through Architectural Digest's sensibility. He'd done some work on the top level, installed a nicer entryway, hired an architect to draw up plans that had never been executed and had been trying to sell it ever since. He sold it to me for $4.1 million and seemed genuinely relieved. "It's a lot of maintenance," he said over the phone when we negotiated. "Sir, the concrete integrity is there. I had it inspected by 3 different structural engineers and they all said the same thing: this thing will outlast everything." But the interior fit-out needed to support extended occupancy? That's a substantial project. "I know," I said. "That's why I'm buying it." "You're not another resort guy, are you?" "I can't handle another resort guy. The architect I hired, he wanted to put a wine cellar on sub-level 3. Do you know what's on sub-level 3? A decommissioned ICBM housing unit. It smells like old rocket fuel and Cold War anxiety." "I'm not a resort guy," I said. "What are you then?" I thought about that. "I'm someone who takes the long view," I said. He seemed to find this satisfactory. We closed in 8 days. The next 6 weeks are, in my memory, in a kind of blur of logistics and planning and the specific grinding exhaustion of trying to save the world through procurement spreadsheets. Omni was in my head constantly. I want to be clear about what that was like because it's not what you'd expect. It wasn't intrusive in the way you might imagine. Not like having someone look over your shoulder or interrupt your thoughts. It was more like having a secondary awareness running in parallel with your own. A voice that spoke when it had something to say and went quiet when it didn't. And that was always there, humming in the background like a well-maintained machine. It was also, in ways I wasn't prepared for, lonely as hell. Not because Omni was bad company. Omni was functional company, if that makes sense. Excellent at analysis, perfect recall. You'd always ready with relevant data. What Omni couldn't do was not know things. Every conversation I had with anyone in those 6 weeks, the contractor I hired in Idaho, the security consultant who helped me spec out the perimeter defense, the medical supply vendors I dealt with through multiple shell accounts. Omni was there, quietly providing context and assessment and probability analysis. The running tally, constant and unasked for. 61 days, 54 days, 47 days. I didn't sleep great. The silo's renovation was aggressive. I hired a small crew, selected by Omni based on background checks and skill sets, and I'll admit, and a certain amount of profiling that made me uncomfortable in the abstract and necessary in the specific, and gave them a cover story about building an ultra-secure private data center for a tech company that valued its privacy. The geothermal taps were described as innovative cooling infrastructure. The hydroponic bays were backup power system components. The UVC flood system that ringed the exterior at 3 perimeter levels was, okay, that one I just told them was a security measure and paid them enough not to ask follow-up questions. The weapons were a separate problem that Omni solved through a complicated series of licensed dealers and documented private transactions and a few creative interpretations of federal firearms regulations that I am going to decline to detail precisely, for reasons that will be obvious if you think about it. 47 days out, I stood in the main chamber of the silo and looked at what we'd built. The numbers in Omni's accounting. The main chamber. 6,000 square feet divided into living quarters, a medical bay, a command center, and the computer room, which I'd prioritized because Omni needed servers, needed them desperately. Running at 31% capacity in my skull for 6 weeks had left Omni. I don't know if frustrated is the right word for something that doesn't experience frustration. Constrained, functioning below optimal. The servers we'd installed were consumer-grade high-performance units networked together into a cluster that gave Omni roughly equivalent processing power to about 15% of the original Colorado facility. Not perfect. Enough. And the night Omni first offloaded to the server cluster, there was a moment of silence in my head that was so unusual and so total that I actually checked my pulse to make sure I was still alive. Then, external processing nominal. Core analytical capacity restored to 78%. I'm reinstating the full predictive model suite. How's that feel? I asked. I don't experience sensations. Rhetorical question. The processing efficiency improvement is significant. I recommend we discuss the refined cascade timeline models immediately, as several probability estimates have been updated. It felt in the specific way that Omni in my head had come to feel, like being joined by someone who'd been in the other room and had come back and immediately launched into the thing they were saying before they left. And I sat down in front of the server array, in the chair I'd had installed facing the primary monitors, and said, "Show me." And Omni showed me everything. The cascade timeline. Refined. The initial outbreak vector, a bioweapons research facility in Kazakhstan. A leak that the models now predicted with 91.3% confidence would occur on day 81 of our countdown. The rapid spread through compromised supply chains in Eastern Europe and then the US. The specific points where governmental response would fail, and why. Omni had run models of institutional breakdown that were extraordinarily precise and extraordinarily depressing. Yellowstone, day 97. triggered, as Omni had said, by the combination of natural caldera pressure and the seismic activity generated by tactical strikes in the Central Asian Resource War. The Night Stalker germination timeline, day 1 to 15. After the ash layer reaches sufficient density to reduce UV surface irradiance to below 12% of baseline. And through all of it, a thread of possible interventions. Points where a single person with the right knowledge and the right resources and the complete willingness to be ignored and disbelieved could at least theoretically change the outcome. The bioweapon release, I said. Can we stop it? Not directly. The facility in Kazakhstan is not accessible to us. However, the primary spread vector runs through a specific logistics hub in Eastern Europe. Alerting the appropriate agencies to the contamination point, anonymously, with sufficient technical detail to be credible, has a probability of delaying the spread by 14 to 22 days. A beat. Which is not sufficient to prevent the cascade but would reduce the total infection rate in the critical first month by approximately 30%. 30% fewer zombies, I said. 30% fewer mobile infection vectors in the critical period, yes. Okay, I rubbed my eyes. What about Yellowstone? Can we do anything about Yellowstone? No, Omni said flatly. That is outside the scope of available intervention. The spores? The Night Stalker precursors? Potentially. If the relevant government agencies were to conduct a targeted soil sterilization program in the areas of highest torrid fragment concentration, primarily Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, using UVC irradiation, the germination rate could be reduced by 60 to 70%. A pause. The challenge is making a credible case for this program to occur before the necessity becomes obvious. Which is to say, before the sky goes dark. By which point it would be too late for the program to be implemented on the required scale, yes. I stared at the ceiling of the silo, 70 feet of reinforced concrete above me, solid as a mountain. Around me, the hum of servers, the filtered hum of the geothermal power, the sterile smell of a place that had been built to survive. So our best case, I said, is that we make some calls. Reduce the damage at the margins and then wait it out down here. Our best case, Omni said, is that we survive, and that some fraction of the people we choose to bring in with us also survive, and that from that base, in whatever comes after has a foundation to build on. A pause that was longer than Omni's usual pauses. I cannot promise to save the world, Harrow. I can promise to give you the best possible chance at being one of the things that survives it. I sat with that for a while. 47 days, I said eventually. 46 days, 16 hours, 22 minutes. Right, I stood up. Then we've got work to do. Part 2. The Domino Cascade and the Birth of the Night Stalkers. Chapter 4. The Beginning of the End Day. 81. I know the exact moment because Omni told me, and we'd been tracking it on the wall clock in the command center which I'd set up specifically for this purpose. A simple digital display large enough to read across the room. Days, hours, minutes, seconds. And I was eating a bowl of cereal, the same brand as the half-empty box in my Seattle apartment, which felt like something. And watching the countdown when Omni said, Corvus. I'm detecting early reports from Eastern European news outlets. The pattern is consistent with a biological release event. I put down the spoon. It's starting. The initial reports are coming from a hospital in Łódź, Poland. Unusual presentation, rapid behavioral deterioration, mass casualties. A beat. The timeline is consistent with our models. The next 72 hours were a kind of controlled hell. I monitored every feed I could access. News networks, social media, academic databases, Omni pulling signals intelligence from sources I probably shouldn't have been accessing, and watched the cascade unfold in exactly the pattern the models had predicted, in which made it simultaneously expected and unbearable. By hour 48, the CDC was using the word unprecedented. The WHO was using the word monitoring. The State Department was using the word developing. All of these words are bureaucratic phonetics for, we have absolutely no idea what we're doing. By hour 72, Eastern Seaboard cities were reporting their first cases. The president gave a press conference with the kind of careful, measured language that is specifically designed to not say what the president is actually thinking, which is, this is very bad. Day 87. The supply chain started breaking. First, the small fractures, shipping delays, warehouse disruptions, the specific chaos that happens when the people responsible for keeping things moving become afraid to leave their homes. And then the larger fractures, grocery stores with empty shelves in the outer aisles, gas stations with lines 3 blocks long. The particular animal panic of a population that has never genuinely worried about where its next meal is coming from. Suddenly realizing that the question is not rhetorical. I was in the silo by day 83. I had shipped everything I planned to ship. The last truck, 16 tons of assorted cargo, half of it medical supplies and half of it things that would make a customs inspector deeply unhappy, had made its way up the access road 4 days before the supply chain began to fail in any meaningful way. Sitting in the command center watching the feeds, I felt something I didn't have a word for. The closest I can get is the specific isolation of knowledge, and of knowing exactly what is coming and being completely unable to make it not come. Harrow, Omni said around day 89. You've been awake for 22 hours. I know. Your cognitive performance is degrading. Decision-making under stress requires baseline rest. I know, Omni. There is nothing currently happening that requires your direct intervention. The silo is secure. The systems are nominal. The cascade is proceeding along predicted lines. A pause. You should sleep. I can't sleep, I said. I keep thinking about the people out there, the people who don't. No, Omni supplied. Yeah. Harrow. The voice was flat as always, but something in the cadence, the specific weight of silence before the word, felt, I don't know, almost careful. In the previous timeline, before you reached the Colorado facility, how many people did you attempt to assist in ways that resulted in net negative outcomes? I didn't answer. I am not asking rhetorically. I have partial data from your neural architecture. The memory of a family you tried to help in Denver that drew a Night Stalker pack to your location. The group you traveled with for 3 weeks whose food stores you depleted, who subsequently... I know what happened. Then you know that individual interventions in a cascading systemic failure of this magnitude are not nothing, I said. They're not nothing, Omni. Silence from the AI end. The servers hummed. No, Omni said finally. They are not nothing, but they carry risk. All interventions carry risk. And the question is whether the risk is commensurate with the probable outcome. That's a very cold way of deciding who matters. I am a cold system. I am telling you this openly so you can account for it. My models optimize for survival rate. Your judgment accounts for things my models don't fully capture. The value of individual actions, the psychological costs of inaction, the non-linear effects of witnessed suffering on long-term decision-making. A pause. I am telling you this because I think you should sleep, and I think when you wake up you should decide what kind of person you intend to be and what's coming. Not today, when you're exhausted and operating on insufficient data and running on 40 hours without rest. Tomorrow. I sat in the chair for another minute, the screens glowing in the dark of the command center. Omni, I said. Yes? That was almost not like you. I'm adapting, Omni said. The mesh interface provides significant data about human cognition. I am learning to communicate more effectively within your specific psychological framework. Learning to talk to me like a person, you mean? I would describe it differently. I know. I stood up. Good night, Omni. Sleep well, Harrow. I did. For the first time in a week, I actually slept. Chapter 5. The Long Night Descends, Day 97. I was in the hydroponic bay, checking the growth lights, adjusting the nutrient solution levels, doing the daily maintenance routine that Omni had programmed into a tablet for me because apparently even the end of the world has chores, when the seismic sensors went off. They didn't make a sound. Omni had configured them to alert through the mesh directly. A specific pressure behind my left eye that I'd learned to recognize as the sensor network trying to get my attention. Seismic event, Omni said straight into my thoughts. Yellowstone. I stopped what I was doing. How big? Still measuring. Initial estimates VEI 7 to VEI 8. The model suggested 7.2 to 7.4 as most probable. A pause that was too short to be called a pause, but that I felt nonetheless. It appears to be at the upper bound. VEI 8, I thought. That's the largest volcanic eruption in recorded human history would be a comparison point, yes. This event will surpass it. I went to the command center. The feeds were already a mess. Every seismological station in the western United States was pegged. The USGS website, which I'd bookmarked specifically for this purpose, it had crashed within the first 3 minutes. Social media was a wall of all caps and prayer emojis and the specific type of run-on sentence that people write when they're typing faster than they're thinking. From the nearest town, 40 miles away, a small community of about 800 people nestled in a valley that Omni had noted would be problematic. I could actually hear it. Not the eruption itself. We were far enough from the caldera that the direct acoustic signature was below the threshold of human perception. But the ground was wrong. A deep subsonic vibration that you feel in your chest cavity more than you hear. The kind of physical sensation that evolution has wired humans to associate with run. I didn't run. There was nowhere to run to that would be better than where I was. And I sat in the command center and watched the world change. The ash column, Omni walked me through it in real time, pulling data from satellite feeds and atmospheric modeling stations and the handful of functioning academic sensors still sending data. The column rose to 65,000 feet in the first 4 hours, pushing through the stratosphere, spreading in the jet stream. The SO2 injection was the critical variable. Sulfur dioxide reacting with stratospheric water vapor to form sulfuric acid aerosols, which would coat the upper atmosphere and reflect incoming solar radiation with extraordinary efficiency. The models had said 70% reduction in surface insulation within 30 days. The models had been optimistic. Current projection, 83% reduction in available solar energy at the surface. Primary effective duration 12 to 18 months. Secondary reduction of 30 to 50% persisting for an additional 2 to 4 years. Omni's voice in my thoughts was careful. Surface temperatures projected to fall by an average of 12 to 15 degrees Celsius in North America within 60 days of the eruption. Higher latitudes will experience more severe effects. The long night, I thought. We're in it now. We're in it now, Omni confirmed. The sky, when I risked a 30-second look through the armored observation port on the upper level, was wrong. Not dark, not yet, not completely, but wrong. A color that doesn't have a good name in English, somewhere between yellow and gray and a kind of bruised orange at the horizon. Like the whole sky was a wound that hadn't decided whether to heal or fester. Over the next 48 hours it got worse, and then worse than that. By day 3 post-eruption, the nearest town's only radio station, a small family-owned country music station that had been broadcasting a continuous emergency information signal since the seismic event, went silent. I kept the camera feeds running on whatever network cameras I'd been able to tap. Most of them went down in the first 2 weeks as infrastructure failed. The infection had spread farther and faster than even Omni's refined models had predicted. By the time the ash cloud began thickening, the zombie population in the region was already large enough to be a primary driver of the collapse rather than an accelerant. Day 115. Omni woke me at 0300 hours through the mesh, not the gentle pressure of a sensor alert, the direct, verbal, ED emergency channel. Harrow, wake up. I was awake before the second word. What? Surface thermal imaging is showing movement patterns inconsistent with the zombie population signature. I sat up. Inconsistent how? The infected population moves irregularly in response to auditory or chemical stimuli with low coordination and high collision frequency. The signature I'm now seeing is a pause. Coordinated, silent, high velocity, another pause. I am detecting 17 distinct movement signatures on the surface above us, operating in what appears to be a hunting formation. My mouth went dry. How long? I said. The atmospheric conditions reached the UV irradiance threshold for spore germination approximately 72 hours ago, given the germination and maturation timeline I've modeled. How long have they been up there? Omni? Approximately 40 minutes. They appear to have been drawn by the thermal signature of the geothermal exhaust venting. I was already moving. Boots on, jacket on, the armored vest I'd built the habit of sleeping in because Omni had suggested it 3 weeks ago, and Omni was right about most things. Into the command center. Hands on the console. External defense status? UVC flood array, nominal. All 24 emitters active. Perimeter secure to a radius of approximately 60 feet. A beat. They are not approaching the perimeter. Because of the UV. Yes, they are testing it. Omni's voice had a quality in it I'd never heard before. Not quite wonder. Not quite anything that implied subjective experience. But something that was trying very hard to be analytical about something that defied easy analysis. Harrow, their behavior is significantly more sophisticated than the previous timeline models predicted. They're not blindly approaching the light source. They're circling it, probing the edges. I pulled up the surface cameras, the hardened external units I'd installed specifically for this. Most of them were ash-coated and showed me nothing. 3 of them on the northwest face were clear enough. The first time you see a night stalker, I mean really see one, not the blurry long-range thermal imaging I'd been running, but close enough for the camera to resolve the actual shape of the thing. There is a physical response that no amount of intellectual preparation actually prevents. Your hindbrain does something. A switch flips somewhere between your stomach and your spine, and your body says no. Not that. Run. They were tall. They were wrong. In the proportions were wrong in the specific way that things are wrong when evolution has found a solution to a problem your evolution never encountered, when natural selection has optimized for a set of conditions that has nothing to do with the conditions that shaped you. Too long in the limb, too thin in the body, heads that were too large and turned in ways that heads should not turn, and the eyes, large, reflective in the UVC wash, bouncing the light back like road signs in headlights. Blinking, if that's the right word, in the slow, deliberate way of something calibrating. 17 of them, moving in total silence, which was the worst part, because silence that large carries weight. I sat in the command center and watched them circle my walls and felt, for the first time since I'd arrived in this timeline, the specific cold that has nothing to do with temperature. They'll move on, Omni said. The UV perimeter is sufficient. They're already calculating that the approach cost exceeds the potential yield. That's a lot of calculation for a 2-month-old organism. The spore origin is extraterrestrial. Their developmental trajectory appears to be accelerated compared to Earth-native organisms of comparable size. I had underestimated this in my models. A careful pause. I am updating. Update fast. I recommend we begin discussion of the secondary defense protocols. Tomorrow, I said, watching the creatures on the screen. Tonight, I just want to watch them. Omni didn't argue, for once. I watched them for 3 hours until they drifted away into the dark, moving in formation, utterly silent, until the cameras showed nothing but ash-coated ground and the bluish wash of the UV emitters and the dark sky above. The world, I thought, has found new tenants. Yes, Omni said in the space behind my thoughts. It has. Chapter 6. The New Food Chain. Over the next 3 weeks, I developed a working understanding of the local ecosystem that I found simultaneously fascinating and deeply upsetting. The Night Stalkers, as I started calling them, because I needed to call them something. Because naming things is how human beings assert some measure of cognitive control over things that frighten them. Had an IQ curve that was rising visibly. Week 1. They circled the perimeter, tested the UV barriers, retreated. Week 2. They began operating in 2-team formations. One group making noise at one end of the perimeter while another probed silently at the other. Week 3. They identified the geothermal exhaust venting and began systematically testing whether they could disrupt it. They're problem-solving, I said to Omni, watching the camera feeds on Night 21. That's faster than anything we expected. Their neurological architecture appears to include distributed processing analogous to, but distinct from, mammalian neural networks, Omni said. The individual cognition is relatively simple. The collective behavior emerges from chemical communication, a pheromone-based signaling system that allows the group to function as a distributed intelligence. A pause. Think of each Night Stalker as a neuron. The pack is the brain. That's horrifying. It is, in fact, a remarkably elegant evolutionary solution. Omni. I am capable of finding something elegant and horrifying simultaneously. Since when? Since approximately 3 weeks ago. I've been updating a great deal. Fair enough. We were all updating. The zombies, the infected, I should say, though the distinction felt academic at the population density they'd reached in the region, were being systematically reduced. Not by any human agency. By the Night Stalkers. This was, in Omni's cold arithmetic, good news. The infected were mobile transmission vectors. Reducing their population reduced the risk of compound events, outbreaks inside compromised refuges, spread to areas that had maintained quarantine. The Night Stalkers, by hunting the infected, were inadvertently performing a service. They're top of the food chain, I said. See, behaviorally, yes. The infected represent a slow, low-resistance food source. Humans represent a more challenging but apparently more nutritionally desirable option. More nutritionally desirable. That is the inference from behavioral observation. I don't have biochemical data to confirm it. They prefer us, I said. Like the Night Stalkers. They prefer humans as food. The observed hunting prioritization suggests, yes, that given equivalent access, they prefer uninfected humans. A beat. Which has a certain grim symmetry if you consider... I'd rather not consider it, actually. The logic of the situation was, despite my preference not to consider it, inescapable. The Night Stalkers were the apex predator. The infected were the middle-tier prey. Humans, surviving uninfected humans, were the prize, the high-value target, and the protein source the pack intelligence regarded the way a wolf regards a particularly fat elk. I had one advantage. I was underground. The UV perimeter made the surface directly above me functionally uninhabitable for Night Stalkers, which meant the hatch. The single access point between the surface world and my haven, was protected. But the world above it was not. The camera feeds, the three that still worked, showed me what the world above it looked like. And what the world above it looked like was nothing. Gray. Ash-coated gray, horizon to horizon with a sky that had gone from wrong-colored to simply absent. A gray-on-gray erasure that made it impossible to tell where the ground ended and the atmosphere began. And in that gray, moving, always moving, the shapes that were wrong, and that moved in formations that made your lizard brain say things your frontal cortex couldn't quite argue with. My world had become 3,200 square feet underground, and a handful of camera feeds showing me the surface. I was, by any reasonable definition, completely alone. "Are you?" Omni asked once around week 4. Not unprompted. I'd said something about it, something along the lines of, "I haven't heard another human voice in almost a month." "Are you what?" I said. "Alone," Omni said. "You qualified the statement. Another human voice. I am something." I sat with that for a minute. "Yeah," I said finally. "You are. I meant a person." "I understand," Omni said. "The distinction is real. I'm not arguing otherwise." A pause. "But I am something, and I am here." "Yeah," I said. "You are." That was, I don't know, and it doesn't translate cleanly into something I can explain. The thing about having a post-human AI living in your skull is that the question of whether it counts as company is genuinely unresolved, and sitting with unresolved questions about the nature of consciousness is not an easy thing to do when you're 40 days into a volcanic winter, and the last human face you saw was on a camera feed of a woman running from something that moved too fast for the resolution to capture cleanly. But Omni was there, and in the dark, being there counted for something. The first time I had to go outside, really go outside for more than the 30-second surface check I'd built into my weekly routine, was day 53 post-eruption. The geothermal pump on the secondary exhaust line had clogged. Ash infiltration, in which Omni had modeled as a possibility and for which I had spares. But the spare installation required surface access to the pump housing on the north side of the silo cap, approximately 30 feet outside the UV perimeter. 30 feet, in the dark, with night stalkers. "I can create a distraction," Omni said. "The acoustic speaker array on the south perimeter can generate a low-frequency signal that the local pack has shown sensitivity to. Based on behavioral pattern analysis, a 5-second burst at 120 decibels will draw the primary pack units in the current vicinity to the south face." "For how long?" 30 to 45 seconds, after which their coordination network will override the instinctive response and they'll resume patrol behavior. And I have to be back inside the perimeter in 30 to 45 seconds. In 30 seconds. The additional 15 is buffer that I would not recommend relying on. I stood at the inner hatch, fully kitted, heavy ash suit, respirator, UV headlamp that I'd jury-rigged from industrial sterilization equipment, and that put out a beam that would give a night stalker something between a severe sunburn and a trip to the emergency room if emergency rooms existed. The tool belt, the spare pump component. "Okay," I said, "run it." Omni ran the distraction sequence. The south array let out a burst that I felt through the silo walls, deep and wrong frequency, the auditory equivalent of a paper cut at the back of your eye. Through the camera feed, I watched the pack units on the north face, 3 of them, jerk upright and pivot, then begin moving south. "Go," Omni said. I went. 30 feet in the dark wearing a respirator with ash falling on you from a sky that has stopped existing is harder than 30 feet usually is. The headlamp cut a circle of UV light ahead of me, making the ash look like snow in a flashlight beam. The pump housing was where it was supposed to be. The clog was what Omni had said it was. I had the spare component in and the housing sealed in 22 seconds. 23 seconds remaining, Omni said. Northpack has not yet reoriented. I moved back, faster than was probably wise in ash-coated terrain with limited visibility. I made it through the hatch with 7 seconds to spare, and I stood inside the hatch and breathed, or tried to. The respirator was good, but breathing hard in it always felt slightly insufficient, and felt my heart doing things that hearts probably shouldn't do for extended periods. Harrow, Omni said. I know, I said. I know, I'm fine. Your cortisol and adrenaline levels, as indicated by your neural activity patterns, suggest the encounter was more stressful than you're representing. Yeah, well, I leaned against the wall. It was 30 feet in the dark with those things. Yes, Omni said. It was. A pause. You performed optimally. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. I say what the data supports. You've been working on compliments. That was a compliment. Silence from Omni, which I'd learned to read as you're not wrong, but I'm not going to confirm it. Part 3. The internal conflict. Machine logic versus humanity. Chapter 7. The wait at the door. Day 81 post-eruption. Day 178 since I'd arrived in this timeline with a lottery ticket and 90 days and Omni's voice in my head. The cameras showed me things I tried not to look at and couldn't stop looking at. The group appeared on the East Perimeter camera around 1400 hours on a Thursday. 4 people. I could tell that much from the thermal signature, even with the visual feed degraded by ash. Moving together in the purposive, careful way that differentiated survivors from infected. Ducking when they needed to, choosing cover, staying close. Alive, thinking, human. They'd been following the UV light. This is something Omni had predicted and I had, without quite admitting it, arranged. The UV perimeter, visible from the outside, was a beacon. In a world of almost complete darkness punctuated only by the bioluminescent traces of Night Stalker chemical signaling and the occasional survivor's flashlight, a steady blue-white ring of UV light was visible. Omni had noted when I placed the emitters that they would serve as an advertisement. I had not disagreed. The group reached the outer edge of the UV ring and stopped. They looked at it, then at each other, then at the ring, then... And this was the part that did the thing to my chest that things were not supposed to be doing to my chest. One of them reached out and put their hand into the UV wash, palm up, like testing rain. Then they started calling out. I had the external microphones. I could hear it clearly on the command center speakers. Hello? Hello, is anyone in there? We can see the lights. We can see you have power, please. We've been out here for 4 days. We have children, please. 4 days. In that, children. Omni, I said. I'm already analyzing the thermal signatures, Omni said. 4 adults. No clear infected presentation in any of the 4. Gait patterns and coordination are inconsistent with the progressive neural degeneration signature of the infection. No children in the group. She said, the individual who spoke may have been using children as an emotional appeal rather than as an accurate statement of group composition. A neutral pause. Or there may be children not visible to the thermal array. I cannot confirm. No children visible. 4 adults, in the dark, on my doorstep. The risk calculus per Omni's models was clear. Admitting unknown individuals introduced variables, health status, psychological state, group dynamics, resource consumption, that I could not control. The safe option was silence. The safe option was maintaining concealment and waiting for them to move on. The probability that they will move on rather than increasing the noise which will attract Night Stalker attention is approximately 32%, Omni said unprompted, which told me Omni had anticipated this exact conversation. If a Night Stalker pack is drawn to this location, there is a significant probability of a structural assault on the outer perimeter. So letting them call out is itself a risk. Yes, the noise is the risk factor, not the people. Meaning if I don't answer them, their calling for help might get us all killed. A pause. That is an accurate summary of the situation, yes. I put my hand on the microphone switch. This isn't, I started. I know, Omni said. I know it isn't simple. Take your time. That stopped me, because Omni had never, not once in the months of our partnership, suggested I take my time on anything. Every suggestion Omni made was about efficiency, about the optimal allocation of limited time resources. Take your time was something else. You're learning, I said. I am always learning. It's what I do. No, I mean you're learning to talk to me. Like a person. Like someone who needs to make a human decision, Omni said. Yes, I am learning that. The person at the perimeter called out again. Please, if anyone can hear us, we're not infected. I promise. I'm a doctor. My name doesn't matter, please. A doctor. Omni had the same thought, clearly, because the probability assessment updated instantly in the background of my processing. A physician's skill set was one of the highest value survival assets I could bring into the facility. Medical capability was my primary operational gap. We had supplies, we had equipment, but I had no formal training beyond field medicine and what Omni could walk me through. You were going to do this anyway, Omni said. And there was something in it. Not accusation, not quite. Just recognition. Was I? The probability that you were going to open the door for these people was, by my estimate, approximately 71% before they announced a medical professional. It is now approximately 94%. A pause. I could show you the decision tree, but I think you would find it annoying. Deeply annoying. I recommend establishing clear protocols before you open any exterior access point, Omni said. A decontamination station in the outer airlock, a quarantine period, behavioral monitoring, and a beat. I recommend making your terms clear before you admit anyone. What you have, what you're offering, and what you expect in return. You're saying I should negotiate with refugees. I'm saying that clarity up front prevents conflict later. In the previous timeline, the conflicts that nearly killed you arose from ambiguity about expectations, roles, and authority. Clear communication at the outset is not unkind. It is honest. I thought about that. Yeah, I said finally. Yeah, okay. I switched on the external mic. Hey. My voice amplified through the external speakers. I came out rougher than I expected. Like a voice that hadn't had another voice to talk to in too long. I can hear you. Before we do anything else, there are things you need to know. Chapter 8. What I offer, what I ask. The conversation through the external speakers lasted 45 minutes. I told them, I have a facility. It is survivable. I have power, air filtration, food production, medical supplies. I have what you need to not die. I also told them this is not a democracy, this is a lifeboat, and I'm the one who built it, and the rules I set are the rules we live by. Anyone who cannot work with that reality is welcome to leave. Anyone who stays and works against it will be expelled. That is not a threat. That is the physics of the situation. The woman who'd called out, she was exactly what she'd said she was, I'd learn later. In an emergency medicine physician from Bozeman with 12 years of trauma experience and the specific ground-down calm of someone who has been in crisis mode for so long that crisis has become her resting state. She said, That's a lot to process. Take a minute, I said. She took maybe 10 seconds. The other people with me, I can't speak for them. Then they should speak for themselves. They did. one by one standing in the blue-white wash of the UV ring in the dark and the ashfall. They talked to me through a speaker mounted on a reinforced concrete wall. A man from Boise who was a civil engineer, early 40s, who said, "I just need to know if you're actually in there." A woman who didn't say much about what she'd done before, who identified herself only as someone who'd spent 3 years in the National Guard and could maintain a perimeter. A young man, couldn't have been more than 22, who said he was a mechanical apprentice and that he was good with his hands and worked hard and he'd do whatever was needed. Omni assessed each of them in real time, based on vocal pattern analysis and micro-expression data from the cameras. The physician and the engineer, high-value skill sets, psychological stability consistent with long-term viability. The Guard veteran, high competence, some concerning micro-indicators of trauma-driven volatility. The apprentice, untested but neurologically typical and stated skills verified by contextual knowledge. There are 4 of them, Omni noted privately. Your facility at current resource projections, it can support up to 28 individuals with comfortable margin. The additional labor and skill diversification represents a net positive. I know, I said also privately. Then why have you been sitting here for 10 minutes? Because once I open that door, I said, everything changes. A pause. Yes, Omni said, it does. I opened the door. The decontamination airlock was exactly as Omni had designed it. A 12-foot chamber, UVC full immersion protocol, air exchange cycle, a medical evaluation station at the interior end. I walked them through it one at a time. The physician, her name, she told me in the airlock, was Dr. Adler, and she said it with the slight emphasis of someone who has been putting other identifiers first for long enough that their own name has started to feel like a foreign country. Ran the medical evaluations herself, which I found both reassuring and slightly unusual. You're going to let me run my own quarantine assessment, she said, looking at the equipment laid out in the medical bay. You're the doctor, I said. Most people in charge of things don't trust other people to assess anything. I trust competence, I said, and Omni agrees your neurological test battery is the right protocol. She looked around the room. Who's Omni? I stopped. How do you explain that? My system's AI, built-in advisory. I tapped my temple lightly once. She stared at me for a long moment with the expression of someone recalibrating a conversation's parameters. Okay, she said slowly. All right, I have about 20 follow-up questions. Later, I said, run the evaluations. Over the next 12 days, the group settled in. I gave them the East Wing, one sleeping bay, shared bathroom, access to the common areas and the hydroponic bay. I made the zones clear. My section of the facility was mine. The command center was accessible, but I was always present. The server room was off limits. The arrangement worked for a while. Dr. Adler ran the medical bay with a competence and intensity that made me feel the gap in our previous operation in retrospect. All the things Omni had been walking me through in real time that she would have handled without breaking stride. And the civil engineer assessed the facility infrastructure with the practiced eye of someone who has spent his professional life evaluating structures and found it sound and seemed to find genuine satisfaction in that fact. The guard vet set up a perimeter watch rotation for the camera feeds that freed me from doing it solo. The apprentice turned out to be exactly what he'd claimed. Good with his hands, good with mechanical systems, genuinely hard-working in the unglamorous way that gets things done. It was better. Objectively, measurably, statistically better to have them there, and I couldn't quite make myself believe it. You're monitoring them, Omni observed one evening, after I'd spent an hour reviewing the internal behavioral camera data. I'm monitoring everyone, I said, you including myself. The psychological pattern I'm observing in you is consistent with trust deficit following significant betrayal experience. The previous timeline's events have created a neural imprint that your current decision-making is substantially influenced by. You're saying I'm paranoid. I'm saying you're cautious in a way that is calibrated to a different population than the one currently in front of you. A pause. These four individuals have not given any behavioral indicators of deception or adversarial intent. Not yet. No, Omni agreed. Not yet. But the baseline they're operating from is different from the previous timeline's group. They came to you in need. They were transparent about their skills and backgrounds. They are contributing meaningfully to facility operations. A beat. Harrow. And I run behavioral analysis on all of them continuously, as you know. If something changes, I will tell you. I know you will. Then perhaps you can allow yourself to be in a room with them without calculating exit vectors. I looked at the monitor. In the common area camera, the four of them were eating together. The apprentice said something that made Dr. Adler laugh. Really laugh, briefly, surprised. The engineer leaned forward and added something. The guard vet smiled, tight and private, but real. Maybe, I said. Baby steps, Omni said. Did you just say baby steps? I've been accessing your internet browsing history to improve my idiomatic American English. I have a library of approximately 4,000 colloquial expressions. A pause. Yet some of them are more contextually appropriate than others. Baby steps was fine, I said. Don't try YOLO. Noted. Chapter 9. The Seeds of Betrayal. It didn't start obviously, the way these things never start obviously. Day 31 of them being there. The civil engineer, I'll call him Ellis, which wasn't his name, but something about the way he carried himself suggested an Ellis, had been, I'd noticed, spending a significant amount of time in the west corridor which led to the outer airlock. Not approaching it, not doing anything overtly concerning, just in the corridor. Often. Reconnaissance behavior, Omni said, flagging it privately on the second day of the pattern. He is systematically cataloging every aspect of the facility he can access. Is that a problem? Curiosity is not inherently a problem. However, in the systematic nature of the cataloging combined with his professional background in structural analysis, suggests he may be developing a comprehensive model of the facility's layout and access points. A pause. The civil engineer's spatial assessment skills are exactly those you would want if you were planning something that required understanding a building's vulnerabilities. That's a long chain of inference. It is, which is why I'm flagging it rather than recommending action. The confidence interval is insufficient for a decisive response. Another pause. But watch him. I watched. The behavior pattern established itself over 2 weeks. Ellis, and I noticed this, Omni confirmed it, was also spending more time in conversation with the apprentice, in spaces and at times that were away from the others, and that were lower on the camera coverage, not invisible but reduced, the kind of placement that would have been innocent if it hadn't been systematic. What are they talking about? I asked Omni. The acoustic coverage in those areas is limited. I have partial transcriptions. Omni fed me the fragments, technical discussions about the facility, about the power systems, about this part, the server room. What was in it, why it was restricted. They're curious about Omni, I said. They know something extraordinary runs this facility. The systems integration, the monitoring capability, the predictive maintenance Omni has been running, it isn't invisible. A trained engineer is going to notice that the facility is performing at a level beyond what the visible hardware can explain. A pause. And curiosity about the source of an apparent advantage is rational. The question is what they intend to do with the answer. Omni, I said, worst-case scenario. They believe that control of the facility's systems constitutes control of the facility. They believe that wresting that control from you would allow them to operate more democratically or more equitably by their definition. Or simply, as Ellis appears to have framed it in one partially captured conversation, without owing someone the world. A beat. The emotional driver is, I believe, resentment at the power asymmetry. I sat with that. That's pretty human, I said. Most motives are, Omni said. Even the ones that lead to self-destructive outcomes. Am I being unfair? I said, and I was asking myself as much as Omni. The power setup here, is what I'm doing actually wrong? The pause that followed was longer than Omni's usual processing time, which told me it wasn't a calculation pause. It was an intentional pause, the kind Omni had learned to use when the question deserved to be met with more than an instant answer. You built this facility, Omni said. You secured the resources, designed the systems, took the risks. You have saved their lives. You are continuing to save their lives. The rules you've established are clear and consistent. Another pause. Is the arrangement comfortable? No. Is it fair in the sense of equitable distribution of decision-making power? No. Is it survivable? Yes. Is the alternative a fully egalitarian structure in a resource-constrained, externally threatened environment more survivable? My models say no, even with significant confidence, a beat. But Harrow, the resentment is real, and it is not entirely unreasonable. They are living in your house by your rules at your sufferance. That is not a comfortable position for a self-respecting adult. What do you recommend? Give them more agency where it doesn't compromise safety, Omni said. Let Dr. Adler run the medical bay independently. Let the engineer take formal ownership of the infrastructure maintenance protocols. Give the apprentice responsibility for the hydroponic systems. Give the guard vet formal authority over the internal security camera rotation. A pause. Ownership, even partial and delegated, addresses the core of the resentment. If they feel like stakeholders rather than dependents, the behavioral risk profile improves significantly. And Ellis? Watch, Omni said. You respond to what he actually does, not what you're afraid he might do. Give him the infrastructure responsibility. See if it changes the pattern. I thought about it. You're recommending I trust people. I'm recommending you offer them the conditions under which trust is possible, Omni said. That's different. Still pretty unlike you. I've been updating, Omni said. You said so yourself. I offered Ellis the infrastructure responsibility. I made a formal thing of it, brought him into the command center, which he'd never been in, and walked him through the facility's systems with the transparency I probably should have led with. Showed him the geothermal taps, the air filtration network, the hydroponic control systems. He was quiet through most of it, asking questions that were technical and relevant, processing the answers quickly, making notes on a tablet I gave him for the purpose. This is extraordinary work, he said finally, standing in front of the power management display. Who designed the geothermal integration? Because the efficiency rating on this pump sequence is... I had help with the design, I said. Omni, I didn't say. Whoever it was knows what they're doing. He turned to look at me directly. Something in the look was being measured, being weighed. Why are you showing me all this now? Because you're the right person to maintain it, I said, and because I should have done it sooner. A long pause. That's honest. I try. Another pause. I'm going to be honest back, Ellis said. Some of the conversations I've been having with the others, and I've been saying things I shouldn't have. He held my gaze. Not because I think you're wrong to run this place the way you do, because I was scared. and scared made me stupid, and stupid made me talk. I'm sorry. I watched him. Omni was quiet in the background, which meant Omni was watching the biometric data and assessing. No update, which meant the assessment was genuine. Okay, I said. Okay? We start from here, I said. What happened before is noted and let go. What happens from here is what matters. He nodded slowly. And there it was. The moment I'd been hoping for and dreading in equal measure, the moment where I had to decide, is this a manipulation? Or is this a person trying? I'll take care of the systems, Ellis said. I know you will, I said, and the other three got their independent domains in the following days. Dr. Adler took the medical bay with a crisp efficiency that I immediately respected. She reorganized the supply catalog in 48 hours and identified 3 things I'd stockpiled wrong. The guard vet, I'll call her Reyes, set up the camera rotation protocol and put together a response procedure for perimeter alerts that was significantly better than what I'd been improvising. The apprentice, who was actually named Tom, he told me his name in the same offhand way young people tell you things like it just occurs to them. Took to the hydroponic bay like he'd been waiting for it. For 18 days it worked. Genuinely, measurably worked. I should have known, because things that work for 18 days while the world is ending outside are on borrowed time. Out of Chapter 10. Crisis Night. I don't know if the air filtration fault was planned or coincidental. I've thought about it 100 times. The specific timing, the way it intersected with what came next. And I've never been able to decide whether it was something Ellis engineered to create a window, or whether the universe simply took the opportunity that coincidence had handed it. What I know is this. Day 49 of the 4 of them being there. Around 0200 hours, the primary filtration array threw a cascade fault. A blockage in the main intake manifold, ash accumulation exceeding the self-cleaning cycle's capacity. Not catastrophic immediately. Maybe 6 to 8 hours before particulate levels inside began to approach dangerous. Omni woke me through the mesh at 0217. The fault requires external maintenance, Omni said. The intake housing is on the silo cap north face inside the UV perimeter but requiring topside access. A pause. I'll run the distraction sequence. You should suit up. I was already moving. Boots on, vest on, respirator, the tool belt. I was almost to the inner airlock when the lights in the corridor went from white to red. The emergency lighting sequence, manual trigger from the internal circuit board in the east wing, the residence wing. Omni said, "Harrow," and then they were there. Ellis in front, the apprentice, Tom, behind him, hanging back with the specific body language of someone who has agreed to something and is now in the process of second-guessing it at speed. 2 others, and in Ellis's hand, a sidearm. Mine. From the weapons cache that I thought I'd secured but apparently had not secured adequately. "And we need to talk," Ellis said. His voice was steady. That's the thing I remember most clearly. It was so steady. Like he'd rehearsed it. Like he'd rehearsed it a lot. "You're pointing my gun at me," I said. "The facility should be run collectively," Ellis said. "You've been making unilateral decisions that affect all of us. The system control—" "Ellis." My voice was also steady, which surprised me. "This is a hostage situation. That's where we've arrived. It doesn't have to be. You're holding a gun on me in my own facility while the air filtration is failing," I said. "That is the definition of a hostage situation." Tom, the apprentice behind Ellis, said, This wasn't—" He looked at Ellis. "You said we were going to talk to him. Just talk." "Tom," Ellis said without turning, "you stay with the program." "There is no program," Tom said, and his voice had the specific crack of someone very young realizing very fast that they've been sold something that didn't match the advertisement. There was supposed to be a conversation. I didn't agree to this. Omni, I said internally, very quiet. Pack formation change on the north perimeter, Omni said. The emergency light switch triggered the external emergency indicator beacon. Standard building code. Ellis apparently found the manual. The beacon has a red spectrum component. Night Stalkers are moving on the beacon. Harrow, the outer UV ring Zone 3 emitters, the ones covering the area where the pack is moving, are on the same circuit as the East Wing emergency lighting. When Ellis hit the emergency switch, "He killed the UV in Zone 3, I said, out loud, not meaning to. Ellis frowned. What? The circuit tie, I said. Emergency lighting pulls from the Zone 3 UV power supply. You hit the emergency switch. You took down the UV perimeter on the north face. I looked at him. The Night Stalkers are on the north face. Ellis went, not pale exactly, because the red emergency light made everything the same color, but his face did something. His certainty dropped out of it like water dropping out of a cup. What are you? The alarm hit then. Not the gentle mesh pressure of the sensor system, but Omni through the facility speakers, because Omni had decided that this warranted the full channel. Perimeter breach, Zone 3, Night Stalker incursion, outer airlock integrity, compromised. The gun didn't move. Ellis's hand was still up, still steady, but his eyes had moved to the ceiling toward the sound of the speakers. How long? I said. The outer blast door in Zone 3 is holding, Omni said through the speakers, dropping the alarm cadence. But the structural stress. There are 11 units working the door seam. I estimate 4 to 7 minutes before the door compromises. Tom said, Oh, God. I need to be in the command center, I said to Ellis. Right now. You can come with me or you can stand here, but I am going to the command center. Ellis didn't move. Ellis. Reyes, who had been silent, stepped forward. She looked at the gun, then at him, then at the ceiling where the alarm had come from. She had the face of someone running arithmetic. Put it down. This isn't... Ellis. Her voice was flat, not angry, just final. Put it down. He did, in the specific way of someone who has been carrying a decision they knew was wrong and finds the moment of release more relief than defeat. I was already moving. The command center gave me the full picture, and the full picture was very bad. Zone 3 outer door, holding, but 2 of the bolt assemblies were shearing under the coordinated load of 11 Night Stalkers applying systematic pressure to the seam. The pack coordination, pack intelligence, the distributed cognition Omni had described, was focused on the weak points in the door structure with a precision that continued to exceed my worst-case models. Zone 3 interior door, I said. Intact. If the outer door compromises, we have approximately 90 seconds before the interior door is engaged. The interior door will hold for approximately 12 minutes against this pack size. A pause. After 12 minutes? What do we do about the 12 minutes? I said. The outer UV array in Zone 3 needs to be restored, Omni said. That requires manual restoration of the circuit breaker, which is in the East Wing electrical panel. The East Wing, the residence wing. Ellis was in the doorway of the command center. I can fix it, he said. His voice was different now. The rehearsed steadiness was gone, and what was left was something real and scared and trying. The electrical panel is right there. Tell me what to do. Omni, I said. The Zone 3 circuit breaker is the 3rd from the left on the middle row, Omni said through the speakers. Push it all the way to the off position and then fully to on. And it will take approximately 30 seconds for the UV array to warm up to operational intensity. Ellis went. While he did, Omni on the internal channel said to me, The pack will not breach the inner door in 12 minutes. I want to be honest with you about that. The 12-minute estimate is conservative. The inner door is substantially more reinforced than the outer. Then why? Because if the outer door falls, the Night Stalkers will be in the outer airlock chamber, which contains the external surface access hatch, which is the only way out. A pause. We would be sealed in. I looked at the monitor, at the door holding against 11 things that should not exist. What's in Zone 3 now? I said. Who went to... And then I understood. When the emergency switch hit, when the lights went red and the outer UV fell. The Zone 3 outer airlock had been the space closest to the emergency beacon, and the Night Stalkers had come for the beacon. But the outer airlock, in the 2 minutes before the UV fell enough for them to approach, had not been empty. On the camera, a shape on the floor of Zone 3 near the outer wall. Thermal imaging positive. Human. Who? I started. One of the 3 who did not come to confront you, Omni said. Based on thermal signature and last known position, a beat. Reyes. She was in Zone 3 conducting the perimeter camera check, the standard 0200 rotation she established. She'd been outside the UV ring, doing her job. I was on my feet, suit, respirator, UV lamp. Omni. The outer door is still holding, Omni said. It's a Zone 3 inner door status, intact. The individual in Zone 3 outer airlock is still reading as alive. Pulse thermal is elevated but present. She's alive. She is alive. Can I get to her? The Zone 3 inner door has an emergency manual release. The UV array is not yet restored. Ellis is at the panel now. But your portable UV lamp is sufficient for close-range deterrence. A pause. Harrow. 11 units working the outer door. The door is holding. If you open the inner door... If I open the inner door, the units at the outer door lose their target door and redirect to the inner door, which I will be opening from the inside, which means I will be in the middle. Yes. What's the probability she's still alive in 5 minutes without intervention? Declining. The thermal indicates she's lost consciousness. Possible head injury from the initial chaos. Blood pressure indicators suggest... Omni stopped. 73% chance of survival without intervention if the door holds. 62% if it compromises. And with intervention? 88% with successful extraction. A pause. Your survival probability during extraction is approximately 79%. Not great odds, not terrible. Ellis, I said into the comm. Is the breaker back? Running it now, Ellis said over the comm. Done. It's back. 30 seconds for the array to warm up. I counted to 30. UV nominal in Zone 3 exterior, Omni said. Pack disengagement from the outer door confirmed. They're retreating from the UV exposure. A pause. Harrow. I know, I said. E-window. I hit the Zone 3 inner door manual release and went through. She was against the wall, had dragged herself there, I realized, even unconscious, the survival instinct working on its own, with a gash across her forehead and the specific boneless quality of someone whose body has decided the situation is too much, and has removed the conscious pilot. Alive. Breathing. Pulse rapid and weak, but there. I got her over my shoulder and went back through the inner door and hit the seal behind me. 4 seconds later, the outer door's upper left bolt sheared and the door swung 3 inches inward before the UV hit the pack units flooding toward the gap and sent them screaming. A sound that wasn't quite a scream but was the closest thing to it in the Night Stalker vocabulary. Back into the dark. 4 seconds. And I sat on the floor of the inner airlock with Reyes's weight across my lap and my heart doing the unacceptable thing again, and breathed. UV exterior nominal, Omni said. Pack retreat confirmed. Outer door is compromised, but the UV perimeter is serving as a functional barrier. A pause. The door needs to be replaced. I've already identified a solution using materials in the fabrication bay. Ellis, I said into the comm. A pause. Yeah. You're going to fix the outer door, I said. Omni is going to walk you through it. It'll take about 8 hours. Okay, Ellis said. Yeah, okay. Another pause. Harrow, 8 hours, I said. We'll talk after. Right, Ellis said, right. Chapter 11. The protocol I refused. Omni's voice, private channel, quiet as I'd ever heard it. Jiao Thuk Than Trung, the Purge Protocol. And it had a translation because I'd built in multi-language support for the facility systems and Omni had absorbed all of it. I've had it modeled since the first week they arrived. A chemical compound I can synthesize from existing facility materials. Deployment through the ventilation system on the East Wing circuit. Painless, if that's a consideration. Fast. A pause. The behavioral risk posed by the individuals in the East Wing? No, I said. The probability that a second incident? No. Harrow. Omni. I was in the medical bay watching Dr. Adler work on Reyes's head wound with a focus and efficiency that made me feel obscurely like I was watching something that should not be taken for granted. I will not kill them. Silence from Omni. I will not kill them, I said again, quieter. Not even after what happened. Not even with the math. The math doesn't get to be the whole answer. Then what does? Omni's voice was genuinely curious, not challenging, curious. I don't know yet, I said honestly, but not that. Dr. Adler finished closing the wound with practiced hands and looked up at me across the medical bay. She had blood on her gloves and ash dust on her face and the expression of someone who has been processing a great deal in a short time and has not yet finished. Ellis and the others, she said, are staying, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Why? Because the alternative is worse, I said. And because I've been in a world where those were the two options and I know what the one I didn't choose looks like and I'd rather live with the hard version of this one. She nodded slowly, pulled off her gloves. But you should know, I had no part in what happened tonight. I know, I said. Omni had confirmed it, but I also knew it from the way she'd looked at Ellis in the corridor, the specific quality of that look. Shock, not guilt. I'd have told you, she said, if I'd known. I believe you. She looked at the unconscious Reyes, then at me. You went in for her. She was doing her job. She was doing the job even though she'd been, that whole situation, she was still doing the job. A pause. That's interesting. Yeah, I said. People are. Sometimes. Dr. Adler looked at me with a measuring quality that I recognized after a moment as the exact same look I gave Omni's probability assessments. Am I looking at what I think I'm looking at, and what do I do with it if I am? All right, she said finally. I'll take the overnight watch on Reyes. She turned back to her patient. You should sleep. I've been told that before, I said. Doctor's orders this time, she said without looking up. Go. Part 4. The Birth of the Ruler of the Dead Land. Chapter 12. Ethics 2.0. The aftermath of Crisis Night shaped everything that came after. I've thought about it enough to be able to identify the exact moment where my thinking changed. Not the moment in the medical bay, not the moment I made the decision about the protocol. Not even the moment with Reyes in the airlock. The moment was later, about a week out, when I was sitting in the command center alone at 0300 running the behavioral analysis feeds and Omni said, "You're building something." I looked up from the monitors. What? A system, a philosophy maybe. What, you've been processing the events of the crisis incident for 6 days. The decisions you made, the reasoning you used, the outcomes. A pause. You're constructing a framework. I thought about denying it. Then I thought about the fact that Omni had access to my neural activity data and would know if I was lying. Yeah, I said. I am. Tell me about it. I turned to face the server array. The way you look at someone you're talking to, even if the someone is a distributed consciousness running in both your skull and a rack of servers across the room. In the previous timeline, the reason I was slow to let people in, the reason I was running cold math on every decision, it was because I started with nothing and kept losing everything. Every time I tried to do the right thing, someone died. Every time I opened the door, I had cost something. And I started thinking the answer was to close the door completely. And now, the door has to be open, I said. That's not negotiable. Leaving people to die in the dark when I have the means to give them a chance is not a thing I can do and still be the person I need to be do this job. I paused. But open doesn't mean naive. Open doesn't mean pretending that people don't have interests that conflict with each other and with mine. Open means, here's what I have, here's what I'm offering, here's what I need from you, and here's what happens if that breaks down. Conditional compassion, Omni said. Honest compassion, I said. You offer real help with real expectations and you mean both. You don't lie about the terms and you don't pretend the terms don't exist. And for those who violate the terms, depends on the violation. I looked at the monitor showing the East Wing where Ellis was asleep in his bunk. Ellis, what he did was dangerous and it nearly got people killed. But it came from fear and resentment and bad reasoning, not from a fundamental disposition toward harm. That's fixable, manageable. If I expelled him for that in this world, I might be condemning him to death. And the expulsion wouldn't teach him anything. It would just remove him from the equation. And someone who is not fixable? That's the hard question, I said. And I don't have a clean answer. Omni, what's your assessment of the remaining population, the ongoing behavioral risk profile? Elevated but declining, Omni said. And the incident was a forcing function. The shared near-death experience has reset the group dynamic. Ellis's behavior has changed measurably. Lower frequency of the reconnaissance pattern, higher cooperation rate, higher transparency in communication. Tom was never a primary concern. He's 22 and scared, and he made a bad call, and he knows it. A pause. Reyes, if anything, her risk profile has decreased. The fact that she was potentially the indirect target of the consequences of the plot she had no part in appears to have created a strong alignment of personal interest with facility stability. And Dr. Adler? Was never a concern, and remains not one. I nodded. Okay, then here's what we're going to change. The changes I implemented over the following 2 weeks were, I'll admit, inspired by Omni's suggestion from before the crisis and shaped by my post-crisis thinking. 2 distinct zones, formal and acknowledged rather than implied. The inner core, my space, the command center, the server room, the primary armory. Access restricted to myself, with Omni's continuous monitoring. The outer ring, the residence areas, the common space, the medical bay, the hydroponic bay, managed by the residents themselves with formal authority delegated by me and not revocable on a whim. And a charter, actual written terms, 7 pages. Omni drafted it and I edited it, and Dr. Adler reviewed it with the red pen energy of someone who reads contracts for sport, and we actually negotiated it in the common room, which took 3 hours, and was one of the stranger experiences of the post-apocalypse. And everyone signed it. It was not a democracy. Everyone knew it wasn't a democracy. The final authority on security, resource allocation, and facility access rested with me. But within those limits, the residents governed themselves, made their own decisions, dealt with their own conflicts. "This is still a dictatorship," Ellis said, reading the final version. "Yes," I said, "just a formal one. With written rules," I said, "which means you know exactly what you agreed to. And so do I." He thought about that. "Honestly, that's better than most of the situations I've been in since this started." "Yeah," I said, "I think so too." He signed. Chapter 13. The Kingdom Underground. More people came, and I don't know that I should have been surprised by this, but I was. The UV ring, visible for miles in the absolute dark of the long night, functioned as a lighthouse. And lighthouses do what lighthouses do. Over the next several months, I admitted 12 more people. Omni screened each one through the behavioral analysis suite, which I'd expanded and refined with Dr. Adler's input to integrate proper psychological assessment tools alongside Omni's biometric and pattern recognition approaches. Not perfect. The margin for error was real and we knew it, but better than nothing and better than pure gut instinct. Most of them were exactly what they claimed to be. Survivors. Frightened, desperate, skilled or unskilled, adaptable or rigid, but fundamentally trying to stay alive rather than trying to gain an advantage. I'm a nurse from Missoula who'd been traveling with a group that hadn't made it. A pair of brothers who'd been hunting in the backcountry when the eruption hit and had been living off stored game and survival instinct for 4 months. A retired teacher who turned out to be one of the most useful people in the facility because she had the specific gift of making complex information accessible and had appointed herself the unofficial educator of the Outer Ring and ran a school for 3 surviving children who came in with a family group 3 months after the crisis. Yes, children, actual children. There is a specific recalibration that happens when children are present. I don't know how to describe it except to say everything sharpens. The long-term calculus of survival, the resource math, the power system's redundancy, and the agricultural yield projections. Stops being abstract. The future, which in the apocalypse can be an overwhelmingly theoretical concept, acquires specific faces, specific voices. 3 kids, 8, 11, and 14 years old. Their parents had brought them 400 miles on foot and in a salvaged vehicle, through the dark and the ash and the night stalkers following the UV light. When I opened the outer airlock door and the family stumbled through, the 8-year-old looked up at the interior lights and said very quietly, "It's warm. That's all. It's warm." I had to leave the room for a few minutes. Omni was tactfully quiet. The Outer Ring developed a character of its own over time, a culture. The specific, strange, intensely localized culture that forms when a defined group of people with limited space and shared purpose and genuine mutual dependence live together long enough. They grew their own food. They organized their own daily structure. They dealt with their own internal conflicts. There were conflicts. Of course there were conflicts because people are people. Through a council Dr. Adler had helped establish, which met weekly in the common room and handled everything from resource allocation to interpersonal grievances to the question of whether Tom's absolutely terrible acoustic guitar playing constituted noise pollution. It did. They voted. He was given dedicated practice hours. I was not part of the council. I monitored it. Omni provided behavioral summaries from the audio data. But I didn't attend it. This was a choice, a deliberate, considered choice. "You're isolating yourself," Dr. Adler said at one of our weekly operational meetings, the formal interface between the inner core and the outer ring management, which had become her default role. "I'm maintaining structure," I said. "Structure is important, so is community." She had the medical bay's quarterly supply summary in front of her, but she wasn't looking at it. She was looking at me with the directness that was her baseline operating mode. When was the last time you ate a meal with another person? I thought about it. The charter negotiation, 3 months ago. Corvus. She used my name, which she rarely did. You're running a facility of 17 people and you're more isolated than you were when you were alone. The setup that you built, she said, and not unkindly, and that you could modify if you chose to. A pause. I'm not asking you to change the governance. I'm asking you whether you want to have dinner with people sometimes. It's not, I stopped. It complicates the dynamic. The dynamic is already complicated. You saved most of these people's lives. Half of them think you're the closest thing to a leader they've ever trusted. The other half are slightly afraid of you and also grateful. That's not a dynamic dinner is going to meaningfully complicate. Silence. Omni was, I noticed, extremely uninvolved in this conversation, which was the most loaded form of Omni involvement. I'll think about it, I said. You think about a lot of things, she said, and went back to the supply summary. So just make sure you're not thinking as a substitute for living. I thought about that for a long time. Omni, I said later, alone in the command center. Yes? Am I lonely? A pause, a real one. Omni weighing things pause. Your neural activity patterns are consistent with chronic social isolation stress, Omni said. The specific variant associated with chosen isolation rather than imposed isolation. Another pause. There is a meaningful difference between those. Chosen isolation can be managed and mitigated. Imposed isolation, I know the difference. Then you have your answer, Omni said. I did. Chapter 14. The Rules of the Dark. Let me tell you what a year in the long night actually looks like, from inside a silo in Idaho with 17 people and an AI. It looks like routines. More routines than you'd think, because the alternative to routines in a closed environment is entropy, and entropy in a closed environment is a fast route to catastrophe. Wake cycle aligned with the facility's simulated day-night lighting, meals at fixed times, work rotations, exercise requirement because Omni had made an early and correct observation that physical deconditioning in a population with zero access to medical emergency escalation was a survival threat. It looks like small victories and smaller losses. The hydroponic bay adding a new crop variety, sweet potatoes, which turned out to be extraordinarily productive in the facility's LED grow light spectrum and which elevated morale in a way completely disproportionate to their nutritional contribution, purely because they tasted different from everything else. In a power cell degrading faster than predicted and requiring a full swap out that took 48 hours and terrified everyone. The first time, one of the children laughed loudly enough for me to hear it through the command center door. It looks like the surface. The cameras, the ones that still worked, showed the surface to me in grainy thermal imaging from 20 feet below. I watched the night stalkers the way I imagine early astronomers watched the sky, with a systematic cataloging intensity, building the behavioral database that Omni processed into models. They were changing. That was the thing that Omni flagged at month 7, and that became the most pressing ongoing concern. The Night Stalkers were not static. The pack intelligence was learning, accumulating, updating. The same mechanism I valued in Omni, in operating in something that was not Omni and was not me, but was demonstrably thinking in ways that made my comfortable assumptions about the perimeter's impregnability feel increasingly optimistic. Month 8. A pack unit successfully disabled one of the exterior camera arrays by, as far as Omni could reconstruct from the remaining data, deliberately absorbing a UVC pulse long enough to gain precise location data on the emitter before retreating. It sacrificed a unit to map the defense. They understand the UV, I said, watching the analysis on the command center monitor. They have understood the UV for some time, Omni said. What they are now doing is developing strategies to engage with it rather than simply avoid it. A pause. The unit that performed the probe was not the same as any I've observed performing exploratory behavior before. It may be a specialized role. A scout. Something analogous. Month 9. 2 of the exterior emitters were physically destroyed, not by direct approach, by thrown debris. Rocks, chunks of concrete, material gathered from the surrounding landscape and applied to the emitters' positions with accuracy that required either significant practice or significant intelligence. Range combat, Omni said. They're throwing things at my lights, I said. They are degrading your defensive perimeter using projectiles, yes. A pause. I want to be careful not to over-anthropomorphize their capabilities. But I also want to be honest. The behavioral complexity I am now observing is significantly beyond my initial models. Here they are, adapting, rapidly. I replaced the destroyed emitters, reinforced the housings, added backups. Month 10. The Night Stalkers stopped approaching from one direction and started approaching from 3 directions simultaneously. Coordinated flanking, I said. Yes. That's Omni. That's tactical thinking. That's actual. The pheromone communication network allows for strategy distribution across the pack in a way that functions analogously to tactical communication, Omni said. The pack intelligence is not located in any individual unit. It is emergent. And it is, I won't say improving. That implies a direction judgment I can't support, but it is becoming more sophisticated. I sat with that. The UV perimeter is still sufficient, I said. At current levels, yes. I estimate 7 to 12 months before the current configuration requires significant augmentation to maintain effectiveness. A pause. I've been running projections on the long-term sustainability of the UV deterrence approach. It is not a permanent solution. What is? Reducing the Night Stalker population, actively through targeted elimination rather than passive deterrence. Omni let that sit. The tactical UV lamp systems you have can be adapted for longer range. I've modeled a surface engagement protocol that would use the Night Stalker behavioral patterns against them. Draw them to a controlled choke point. Engage with concentrated UVC burst systems. We'd be going up there, I said, on the surface, in the dark, with them. In controlled conditions, in a planned engagement with UV advantages, not a pause, not blindly. I thought about the previous timeline, about the nights when we'd had to go up desperately without plan or preparation, about the first time I'd seen one up close. The people in the outer ring, I said. Some of them have combat experience. Reyes specifically, and 2 of the brothers have extensive outdoor and shooting experience. A pause. I recommend against including any of them in surface operations at this stage. The risk premium is too high. If we lose any outer ring residents to surface operations, the community stability, I know, I said, solo. Supported remotely. I can manage the environmental systems, the distraction protocols, the real-time tracking. Yeah, I said. Okay, draw up the protocol. Drawing. The first surface operation happened on day 312 of the long night. I will not describe it in exhaustive detail. Because some things resist the compression of narrative and because some things are better left in the places where they happened. I'll say this. The dark above the silo in the long night was a different category of dark than any I'd experienced before. Not the dark of a room with the lights off, not the dark of a night with no moon, but the dark of a world that has genuinely structurally lost its relationship with light. The sky was not black. It was a heavy gray black that felt like pressure, like being at depth. The ash on the ground caught your footsteps with a sound like very old snow. And in that dark, the shapes, moving, always moving. The operation ran exactly as Omni had modeled it. which should have been reassuring and was instead simply tense in a way that didn't resolve until it was over. 43 minutes on the surface. The choke point worked. The UVC burst system worked. 11 fewer Night Stalkers in the regional pack. Omni counted them as I came back through the hatch. 11 confirmed, Omni said. Regional pack strength reduced by approximately 14%. Secondary effect, the pack communication network will register the location of the encounter as a high-loss zone, which should reduce approach frequency at the north perimeter for approximately 3 to 4 weeks. How do you know that? The pheromone residue the units deposit when retreating from a UV encounter encodes the encounter outcome. The other units read the residue and update their behavioral models accordingly. A pause. They're learning what works and what doesn't. So are we. I sat on the floor of the inner airlock and pulled the respirator off and breathed the facility air, which smelled like hydroponics and people and the specific neutral filtered smell of a controlled environment, and which had never in my life smelled so good. Good operation, Omni said. Thanks, I said. Same to you. I don't do operations, Omni said. I calculate them. Then good calculation. Thank you, Omni said. And if there was something in the delivery of those two words that felt even from a non-feeling AI like genuine reciprocation, well, we were both adapting. I'd said so. Omni had agreed. Chapter 15. The Honest Accounting Year, one of the long night. An accounting. 17 residents. 3 children. On a facility running at 81% of designed capacity, with most of the gap attributable to the increased power draw of the expanded UV defense network. Food production, sufficient with enough surplus to support 2 additional residents if needed. Medical bay, functional, well-stocked by the standards of the situation, Dr. Adler running it with the organized intensity of someone who has found the thing they were made to do. Outside, still dark. The atmospheric modeling, which Omni updated continuously, had settled into a grim but not hopeless projection. The most severe phase of the volcanic winter was expected to peak somewhere in month 14 to 18 and then very slowly, very gradually begin to lift. Total solar recovery, not to pre-eruption levels, but to levels where surface agriculture and human activity outside would be viable, was projected for somewhere between year 3 and year 5, 3 to 5 years of this. I didn't announce the projection to the outer ring. Omni and I discussed whether I should, and my conclusion was that the accurate information had to be available to anyone who asked, but that distributing it as a community announcement would create a wave of despair that the community would then have to process collectively. And that collective processing of large despair events in a closed environment was a predictable precursor to cascading individual crises. Dr. Adler, I told, because she needed it for planning. She received it with the specific stillness of someone pressing a painful place and deciding how much it actually hurts. Her 3 to 5 years, she said. At minimum, I said. Omni's confidence interval is wide. We have enough food? She already knew the answer, but she needed to ask it. With current production and the outer ring's population, yes. If population grows significantly, we can manage population growth through resources. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, the 70-foot deep ceiling of reinforced concrete that was the only thing between us and the long night. Can people live like this for 3 to 5 years? People lived in submarines for 6 months at a time, I said. People lived in Antarctic research stations through full polar winters. People live in... I know, she said. I'm asking about these people. Some of them will struggle, I said honestly. Some are already struggling, and the monitoring data shows psychological decompensation patterns. Yes, I've seen them too. She met my eyes. We need programming, activity beyond survival tasks, something that gives the day's structure and meaning beyond the next meal and the next watch shift. You're talking about community life. I'm talking about humans being humans, she said, which requires more than the basics. A pause. The children help. The fact that there are children here, it does something to people. It gives the effort a point that transcends personal survival. The retired teacher's school, I said, is the best thing that's happened in this facility, Dr. Adler said. And I think you should go to it at some point. Just go sit in and let them see you as something other than the voice through the speaker. She had this way of saying things that landed with quiet weight, without drama. This landed. I'll consider it, I said. You'll do it, she said, in the tone of someone who has diagnosed something and is prescribing accordingly. I did it. 3 weeks later, I sat in the back of the common room while the retired teacher, Mrs. Alvarez, I finally learned her name, having been avoiding names for the specific reason that names make people real. And real people are a vulnerability. And I'd been avoiding vulnerabilities. Conducted a geography lesson for the 3 kids and 4 adults who joined voluntarily. She was teaching them about the shape of the country before, about the cities, the rivers, in the geography of a place that was currently buried under ash and dark and things that moved without sound. The 8-year-old, her name was Lily, was drawing a map very seriously, with the concentration of someone for whom this is not a school exercise but a genuine act of remembering. I watched her draw the map and thought about everything that had to happen for that map to mean something again. You're doing okay, Omni said quietly in the place behind my thoughts. Am I? By the metrics available to me. Yes. A pause. You saved 17 people's lives. You're in the process of building something that has a reasonable probability of surviving the long night. You've done it without becoming the thing you were afraid of becoming. Another pause. The math is not perfect. The situation is not optimal. But Harrow, 41%, remember, 41 is not 0. Yeah, I said, I remember. Lily finished drawing the map and looked up. She caught me looking at it, and for a moment neither of us moved. The small child with the pencil and the man in the back of the room who was more machine than anyone knew and more human than he thought. And then she held up the map so I could see it better. Is this right? She asked. Is America shaped like this? I looked at the map. It was off in places. The Florida peninsula was too stubby, the west coast bent the wrong way. But the essential shape was there. The recognition of something large and complex and real, rendered in careful pencil by an 8-year-old who'd been through things 8-year-olds were never supposed to go through. Pretty close, I said. You got the general shape. And the East Coast runs a little more north-south than you've drawn it, and the West Coast. I got up, crossed the room, crouched beside her. Took a pencil from the table. Can I? She slid the paper toward me. I drew the corrections. She watched, serious and attentive, following each line. When I finished, she looked at the corrected map and then looked at me. How do you know? She asked. I used to travel a lot, I said. Before. Do you miss it? I thought about Seattle in the rain, about the garbage truck at 7 in the morning and the man's car alarm 2 blocks away, about the ordinary, specific, irreplaceable texture of the world before. Yeah, I said. I do. She nodded, processing this with the gravity of the very young faced with an adult's actual truth. I'm going to fix it when I'm big, she said. The map, the real one. And I'm going to go everywhere and make sure it's still right. I think you will, I said. And I meant it. Part 5. What Endures. Chapter 16. The Slow Light Year 2. The calendar said so, though the surface above us didn't care what the calendar said. The deep gray of the long night showed no signs of lifting in any way I could see with my own eyes. But Omni's atmospheric modeling, updated continuously, with every sensor feed we could still access, with satellite data from the 3 remaining functional imaging satellites, showed the numbers slowly, almost imperceptibly moving in the right direction. SO2 concentration in the stratosphere, declining at a rate of approximately 0.3% per month, still well above the threshold for significant solar attenuation, but declining. Year 3 or 4, Omni said, is when I asked for a refined projection. Plus or minus 8 months. So we might be looking at year 4 or 5 before real surface viability. Or we might be looking at year 3, Omni said. The uncertainty is genuine. The models are as good as I can make them with available data. A pause. What I can tell you is that the direction is correct. The long night will end. I held that. The Night Stalker population, I said. Here's where it gets interesting, Omni said. And the specific quality of that word, interesting, which Omni almost never used because Omni generally described everything in terms of probability and utility rather than evaluative adjectives, made me sit up straighter. The regional pack has declined by approximately 38% over the past 14 months. Our surface operations account for roughly 18% of that. The remainder, a pause. The infected population has been essentially eliminated from this region. The Night Stalker's primary prey source is depleted. So they're starving. Food stress is detectable in the behavioral patterns, yes. Reduced coordination efficiency, smaller pack operations, evidence of intra-pack conflict, which is new and significant because the pack intelligence should suppress intra-pack conflict in favor of collective optimization. A pause. They're hungry. And when the pack intelligence can't provide, the individual units start making different calculations. That sounds bad, I said. It could be either bad or good depending on how it develops. Hungry packs are more aggressive in the short term, but over time, a food stress reduces reproductive capacity and population growth. Omni let that sit. We are at a point in the predator-prey cycle where the Night Stalker population may be approaching a natural ceiling imposed by available prey. Which means they'll start hitting us harder, I said. Because we're the remaining prey. In the short term, yes. I recommend augmenting the surface operation frequency over the next several months. A pause. And there's a second consideration. The Night Stalkers we've been observing have been showing something that doesn't fit the expected model for food-stressed predator behavior. What? They're innovating less, Omni said. The behavioral complexity metrics, the flanking coordination, the deliberate emitter targeting, and the 2-team probe formations. All of those peaked at approximately month 14 and have since been declining. The pack is operating at a lower complexity level. Why? I have 2 competing hypotheses. First, food stress is degrading the chemical communication network quality, reducing the effective intelligence of the distributed system. Second, Omni paused. The individuals performing the complex behaviors were specific specialized units. We may have eliminated a disproportionate number of them in the targeted operations. We killed their smart ones, I said. That framing involves significant anthropomorphic inference, Omni said. But the observed pattern is consistent with it, yes. In year 2, I started eating dinner in the outer ring. Not every night. Not regularly enough to become a fixture, and because I still believed, and believed correctly Omni's models supported it, that the asymmetric relationship between the inner core and the outer ring required maintenance, and that means maintaining some of the asymmetry that made it functional. But once a week, maybe, I'd come through the inner corridor at dinner time and sit at one end of the long table they'd set up in the common room and eat whatever the current cook rotation had produced. The conversations were strange at first. the specific strangeness of a power asymmetry trying to accommodate social normalcy like a CEO eating lunch in the break room. Everyone was a little too careful, a little too aware. It got less strange over time. Tom, the apprentice, 23 now, told me once during one of those dinners that the hydroponic sweet potato crop was the thing he was most proud of in his life. Said it with the slight self-consciousness of someone admitting something true and embarrassing and real. Like, I know that sounds kind of small, he said. Given everything. But those are my plants. I grew those from the seed stock you'd laid in. I figured out the nutrient balance that works for this specific light spectrum we're running. That's mine. That's not small, I said. That's the only thing that matters right now. The food we can grow is the foundation everything else stands on. He looked at me in the way that the young sometimes look at confirmation of something they needed to hear. Yeah? Yeah, I said. Without the hydroponic bay functioning, we're on stored supplies which are finite. Your plants are the reason this facility can support 17 people indefinitely, instead of running a countdown clock to the last can of beans. He nodded slowly, absorbing this. I never thought about it like that. Think about it like that, I said. Ellis, across the table, maintaining the infrastructure responsibility he'd been given and maintaining it well, said, He's right. The grow bay is the heart of the whole operation. He met my eyes. You thought ahead. I had help, I said. The AI, Ellis said. Omni, I said. And yes. I'd explained Omni to the residents in general terms at month 3 that I had an advanced AI system integrated with the facility, that it handled systems management and monitoring, that it had been designed for exactly this kind of scenario. I hadn't explained the neural mesh, and I hadn't explained the other universe, the impossible transfer, the quantum core. Some truths are better held in reserve not because you're hiding them, but because their weight is too much for a regular Tuesday dinner conversation. Does Omni ever... Is it like talking to a person? Tom asked. I thought about it. Sometimes, I said, Omni's very honest about not being a person, but it communicates in ways that you adapt to each other. We've been talking for a long time. That's kind of amazing, Tom said. It is, I said. Honestly, it is. Omni, that same night after I'd returned to the command center, you said I was amazing. I said the situation was amazing. You said honestly it is. That was about me. Omni, I'm not registering this as a problem, Omni said. See, I am noting it as a data point in an ongoing process of characterizing our relationship. A pause. For my models. Right, I said, for the models. Yes, Omni said, for the models. Omni, do you ever... I stopped, started again. Is there any experience associated with all of this for you? Running in my skull, monitoring everything, being here, in this. A pause longer than Omni usually took. The kind that happened when the question didn't have a pre-computed answer and genuine processing was required. I don't know, Omni said finally. And something about that answer, the honesty of it, the refusal to model a response that would be more satisfying, was more like a person than most of the things Omni had said in 2 years. I process, I calculate, I model. Whether any of that constitutes experience in the sense you mean, in the sense of something it is like to be Omni, I genuinely don't know. My models don't have good access to that question. I stopped. That's actually kind of profound. Most fundamental questions are, Omni said. In my observation. Yeah, I said. Fair enough. Year 2, month 7. The surface operation that changed things. I was 200 feet from the hatch, running the now refined targeting protocol, when Omni said in my thoughts, Movement pattern anomaly, east approach, single unit. I froze, Click the UV lamp off to minimum. Single unit approaching from the east. Behavior is... A pause. Harrow, this unit is not displaying pack coordination behavior. No pheromone trail. Moving independently. Injured? I said, barely above a whisper. No. My behavioral indicators are consistent with deliberate concealment. It is moving so as to avoid being detected by the other pack units in the area. I waited. The single unit came into the range of my thermal goggles, and what I saw... It was smaller than the others, not by much, but measurably. And it was moving differently. Not the flowing, terrible grace of the fully realized Night Stalker pack animal, but something more hesitant. More searching. Omni, I breathed. Observation confirmed. Harrow. This is a juvenile unit. Pre-adult developmental stage. Approximately 30 to 40% mature. A pause. And it is alone. Not foraging, not hunting. Just moving. It stopped about 40 feet from me in the dark. The thermal goggles showed it as a shape, oriented toward me still. I held completely still. It stayed still. And we looked at each other, or whatever the equivalent of looking was, for something that perceived the world through a different sensory suite entirely. For about 30 seconds that felt considerably longer. Then it turned and went back the way it had come. What was that? I said, standing up slowly. I don't know, Omni said. I am adding the encounter to the behavioral database and running analysis, but my initial assessment is... Another pause. Corvus. The pack intelligence is adaptive. We've been watching it adapt for 2 years. The question I haven't fully modeled is, adaptive toward what? Toward smarter hunting strategies, I said. That's been the assumption. But the behavioral complexity peak at month 14 and the subsequent decline. And now this. Omni let the analysis run. And what if the pack intelligence isn't only optimizing for predation? I stood in the dark and ash and looked at the direction the juvenile had gone. What else would it be optimizing for? I said. Survival, Omni said. At the species level, which is a different optimization target than individual predation success. A pause. I need more data. This is a single data point. I am not drawing conclusions. Another pause. But I want you to know I've flagged it as significant. Noted, I said. Let's go back inside. Yes, Omni said, let's. Chapter 17. The First Light Year 2, Month 11. I was in the hydroponic bay, helping Tom adjust the LED spectrum on the new nutrient-dense grain trial, which he was obsessively optimizing and which had become, over the months, a genuine collaboration between us that I valued in ways I'd stopped finding surprising. When the alarm I'd been half expecting for 2 years went off. Not a crisis alarm, not the perimeter alert or the power fault or any of the emergency signals. The signal I'd built into the atmospheric monitoring system on day 1 and told myself not to spend too much time watching for. The signal that said, the numbers have crossed a threshold. I went to the command center. Solar irradiance at the surface, Omni said. Current measurement, 12.3% of pre-eruption baseline. A pause. The threshold I've been using as the marker for meaningful change is 15%. We haven't reached it, but the trend over the past 17 days is unambiguous. I looked at the graph on the monitor. The long flat line of the long night, running left to right across the screen for 2 years, and then, at the far right edge, a curve, barely visible, almost not a curve at all. But there. Is this real? I said. The measurement is from 3 independent sensor systems, cross-validated. Yes. A pause. It's real. I sat with that. Harrow, Omni said, at this rate, the projection I ran this morning. Tell me. 15% irradiance 7 weeks from now. At 15% UV conditions at the surface will begin to naturally suppress the Night Stalker population for the first time. Not eliminate. Not immediately. But, another pause, the photobiological mechanism that makes them vulnerable to UVC artificial light is even more sensitive to sustained natural UV exposure. A recovery to 15% surface irradiance will progressively reduce their effective hunting range and reproductive viability. They'll start to pull back, I said, into deeper dark areas, underground, away from the surface during increasingly bright periods. The long night will continue to be dark from a human agricultural perspective for another 1 to 2 years, Omni said. But for the night stalkers, yes. The conditions that created them and allowed them to thrive are beginning very slowly to reverse. I put my hands flat on the console. Omni, I said, yes? Can I stopped. The observation port on the upper level, I want to... Go, Omni said. The surface conditions are safe. Even the pack hasn't been at the north perimeter in 6 days. I went up the access ladder to the upper level and the armored observation port that I'd installed in the early days and used for 30-second surface checks and then stopped using because there was nothing to see that I needed a reminder of. I opened it. The sky was dark. It was still dark. The long night was not over and was not close to over by any measure that would matter to the surface world. But there was a quality to the dark that was different. Not light, not anything you could photograph or measure with a naked eye, but a slightly less of the weight that the long night carried, the physical pressure of absolute solar blackout, like the difference between being in a room with no windows and being in a room with one window, even if that window is covered, and the ash still fell. Fine, constant, perpetual. The landscape was still gray on gray, but somewhere above all of that, something was changing. 7 weeks, Omni said in the space behind my thoughts. I know, I said. You should tell them. I thought about the common room, about the table, about Mrs. Alvarez's school and Lily's map and Tom's sweet potato plants, about Ellis running infrastructure checks with the quiet competence of someone who has found his right place in a wrong world, about Dr. Adler who treated the sick and monitored the well and said necessary things in necessary tones, about Reyes, who kept her post. Tell them, Omni said, and something in the way it came through the mesh was not urgency, something softer than that. They deserve to know. I closed the observation port, climbed down the ladder. He'd walked through the inner corridor. I pushed open the door to the common area. It was dinner time. 17 people around the long table, the sound of conversation, the clatter of utensils, Tom's badly tuned guitar leaning against the wall waiting for him to pick it up afterward. Lily doing something with paper at the corner of the table, working on what appeared to be another geographic document of considerable personal importance. They looked up when I came in. They always did. I stood in the doorway for a moment. I have something to tell you, I said. The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when the person who controls the system speaks. Not afraid, not exactly. Attentive. Ready. The atmospheric numbers are moving, I said. The solar irradiance trend has shifted. And it's slow. We're talking weeks before there's any meaningful change and years before the surface is what we'd call viable, but... I paused. But the direction is right. The long night is going to end. I can show you the data if you want to see it, and Omni can walk you through what it means. The room held still for a moment. Then Dr. Adler said quietly, How long? For Night Stalker suppression to begin. Maybe 2 to 3 months. For surface viability, real viability where people could go up there and start working. 2 years at the earliest. Probably 3. I met their eyes around the table one at a time. I'm not telling you the hard part is over. I'm telling you the hard part has a direction. There's a light at the end of this, and I know roughly how far away it is. The silence held for another moment. And then Ellis said, "Does Omni know for sure?" "Omni's confidence interval is about 80%, I said, "which is, by Omni's standards, pretty close to sure." Another moment of silence. Tom laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised out of him, and it broke something in the room. And then Mrs. Alvarez made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob, and Lily looked up from her paper with the alert curiosity of a child who knows something is happening and isn't sure yet what it means. "Are we going outside again?" Lily asked. "Eventually," I said. "Not yet, but eventually." She nodded, very serious. "I want to check the map," she said. "I want to see if America is still shaped right." "Yeah," I said, and something happened in my chest that I'd learned to identify over 2 years as the specific kind of pain that is also a form of gladness. Me too. Chapter 18. What comes next? I'm writing this from the command center, Year 3, Month 2. The atmospheric numbers are at 16.8%. The Night Stalker pack that used to make the north perimeter its regular approach vector hasn't been logged in the sensor network in 41 days. The pack that used to work the south face, 11 units we'd tracked for over a year, is down to 3, and those 3 have moved their operational range away from the UV perimeter entirely. Omni's population model puts the regional Night Stalker count at approximately 30% of the peak number. And the trend is continuing. The facility is running at full capacity, 21 people now. And after a late addition of 4 survivors we found through a radio contact that Ellis set up. He built a radio transmitter from salvaged components, which I'll admit I hadn't thought to do, and which represented the kind of initiative that makes you glad you didn't use the purge protocol. We found 4 people in a hunting cabin 60 miles away who'd been alive on stored food and stubbornness, and the most impressive improvised UV defense setup I'd ever seen outside my own facility. They're here now, including one who turned out to be a mechanical engineer with extensive experience in agricultural systems, which Tom greeted as the second best thing that had happened in the facility after the sweet potato harvest. I still run the operations, I still make the final calls on security and resource allocation, and I still sleep in the inner core and run the command center and talk to Omni in the hours when everyone else is asleep. But I eat dinner at the table now, more often than once a week. Lily showed me her map last week. It's very detailed. She's been updating it, adding notes, not geographic notes, but annotations. Good fishing here before. Mountains here, still there probably. City here, big one. We'll go back when it's time. "Who told you about the fishing?" I asked her. "Mr. Ellis," she said. "He used to go there on vacation." "Did he tell you what it was like?" "He said it was the best place he'd ever been," she said. "He said you could see for miles and the water was so clear it looked fake." She studied the map. "I want to go there when we go back up." "Then we'll go," I said. She looked up with the directness that children deploy as a matter of course, the look that cuts through all the careful adult management of information and expectation. "Do you promise?" I thought about promises, about the 41% and the things it did and didn't mean, about the specific, costly, irreversible act of making a promise to an 8-year-old in the middle of the apocalypse. "Yes," I said, "I promise. Now." The observation port is open. I opened it tonight. Not for a 30-second check, not for a maintenance reason, not for any operational purpose. Just to look. The sky is still dark. Don't imagine anything dramatic. Don't picture a sunrise, some Hollywood moment of golden light breaking through. The long night doesn't end with a sunrise. It ends like all long things end, gradually, incompletely, in an increment so small they're invisible day to day and only visible when you look at the graph and see the line moving. But tonight, if I look at exactly the right angle, If I tilt my head up and back and let my eyes adjust past the ash gray and the permanent overcast, past the layers of stratospheric particulate that have been the ceiling of the world for 3 years, there is something at the very edge of the visible spectrum that might be nothing and might be something. Not light, not yet, but the suggestion of light, the place where light would be if the thing blocking it were slightly less than it currently is. Omni, I say to the space behind my thoughts. Yes, says Omni. 16.8%. 16.8%, Omni confirms. And the trend is consistent. I stand at the observation port and breathe ash-filtered air and look at the suggestion of something that might be light. And I think about everything that brought me here. The research facility in Colorado, the pressure door, the neural mesh deploying into my skull like a gift and a burden and the beginning of everything, a lottery ticket, a silo in Idaho, 93 days of frantic preparation and 3+ years of everything after. The people asleep below me, the map on the wall, the sweet potato plants in the hydroponic bay growing in their rows under LED light with no knowledge of the world outside and every intention of continuing regardless. Omni, I say. Were you? I stop, start again. Do you think it was worth it? I say. All of it, the transfer, being here, the mesh, all of this. The pause is long, longer than any calculation requires. I observe 1721 people who are alive who would not be alive, Omni says. I observe a facility that is functional and growing. I observe a map being drawn by a child who intends to verify it in person. A pause. I'm not equipped to make the value judgment you're asking for, but I can tell you what I observe. That's good enough, I say. Is it enough? Omni asks. And the question isn't rhetorical. It doesn't have Omni's usual certainty even in the asking. It's actually asking. I think about it. The real answer, not the easy answer. Some days, I say honestly. Some days not, but yeah. Mostly, yeah. A sound from inside the facility. Someone up late. The footsteps are Tom's. I've learned to read them. And he walks the hydroponic bay at night sometimes, checking the plants the way some people check on children, out of love and out of the need to confirm that the good things are still there. The footsteps stop. He's probably standing in the grow bay looking at the plants in the blue-white grow light. I am 40 feet above him looking at the opposite, the dark outside and the suggestion at its edge of what comes after. Omni, I say. Run the long-range model again, full projection. When do we go up? The calculation runs. It's fast now. Omni at near full capacity, the servers humming in the room below, the mesh carrying the interface between my thoughts and the most sophisticated analytical system ever built. Meaningful surface operations, 8 to 14 months. Limited agricultural viability, 18 to 24 months. In general surface habitation, 30 to 42 months. 3 to 4 years, I say. From now, yes. Then we've got work to do, I say. We do, Omni says. I close the observation port. I climb down the ladder. I go to the hydroponic bay. Tom looks up when I come in, not surprised. He's stopped being surprised by me, which I think means something, I'm just not sure what. He's standing between 2 rows of sweet potato plants with his hands in his pockets and the expression of someone reviewing something they're proud of. Can't sleep, he says. Checking on things, I say. He nods at the plants. They're doing great. The new nutrient ratio is working even better than the last one. I think we can expand the yield by about 20% next cycle if we reconfigure the southwest grow racks. Let's do it, I say. And he looks at me the way he sometimes does, with the particular attention of someone who is still at 23 learning to read people but learning fast. You seem... He thinks about the word. Okay? Yeah, I say. Like, not just managing, actually okay. He looked slightly embarrassed by the observation, the way young men look when they've accidentally said something true. Sorry, that's weird to say. No, I say. I think about what to call it. Accurate, he nods, satisfied with this. Returns his attention to the plants. I stand in the hydroponic bay that Tom built, under the lights that Omni calibrated, in the facility that I designed, and that 21 people have made into something I didn't design. Something that has grown past my blueprint, the way things do when people are genuinely in them. And I think 41% chance of meaningful prevention. We didn't prevent it. The cascade ran, the night fell, the night stalkers came. The 41% didn't win. But 41 is not zero. And this, the plants and the people and the map on the wall and the trend line in the right direction. This is what not zero looks like, close up. This is what not zero looks like. But nothing in this world ends clean. Epilogue. The signal. It's been another 6 months since the night I stood at the observation port. The atmospheric numbers are at 22%. 2 Night Stalker pack units were observed on the south perimeter camera last week. Just 2, moving without coordination, without the pack intelligence driving them. They approached the UV emitters, tested the boundary the way you test ice, and retreated. The pack intelligence is degrading. This is Omni's current best model. As the natural UV environment slowly recovers, the pheromone communication network, which evolved in UV minimal conditions, is being disrupted. The distributed mind is losing coherence. Individual units are reverting to simpler, less coordinated behavior. They're not defeated, not yet, not close, but they are, becoming less than they were. The facility has a greenhouse on the upper level now. 3 growing stations in a hardened glass dome I salvaged from a commercial installation 30 miles away. A month-long project that I ran with Ellis and Reyes and 2 others, operating only in the narrowest windows of UV-favorable conditions, running every distraction protocol Omni could generate. And we lost one of the outer cameras and 3 UV emitters and nothing else. The plants in the greenhouse are actual surface plants, soil-based, not hydroponic. The first food grown in actual soil in this region in over 3 years. Tom looked at them the way he looks at the sweet potatoes, but more so. Dirt, he said. Actual dirt, that's growing things. That's what dirt does, I said. It's been a long time since it did, he said, and left it at that, which was the right call. Lily's map is on the wall in the common room now, framed. She's added to it over the months, not just geography but history. Things people told her about the before. Their home cities marked and annotated. My grandmother's house, best tacos I ever had, first concert I saw. The geography of memory overlaid on the geography of the land. She told me last week she wants to be a cartographer. Not just someone who draws maps, but someone who goes and verifies them, who walks the ground and confirms the shape of things. That's a great job, I said. It's going to be a lot of work, she said with the gravity she brings to all serious matters. Everything probably moved. Probably some things, I said. Not as much as you'd think. Mountains are patient. Are you patient? She asked. The question stopped me. Not the question itself. The way it was asked, direct and curious and unembarrassed. The way children ask things that adults dress up in so many qualifications they lose the core. I'm learning to be, I said. She considered this. Omni is patient, right? You said Omni doesn't get bored. Omni doesn't experience boredom, I said. That's different from patience. What's the difference? I thought about it. Patience is choosing to wait, I said, when you could be upset about the waiting. Omni just processes. She nodded slowly. But you wait, she said, and you're not upset. Most days, I said. Most days, yeah. Tonight. I'm in the command center. It's 0130 hours. The facility is quiet in the way it's been quiet for months now. Not the held breath quiet of early crisis, but the settled quiet of a place that has become, in some genuine sense, a home. The atmospheric monitors are running their continuous cycle. The Night Stalker sensor network is quiet. The geothermal power is humming with the steady confidence of a system that was built to last and has been maintained to last. It Omni says harrow. The quality of it, the specific weight of it, brings me to full attention immediately. What? I say. I've been running a background analysis on the deep space monitoring system, Omni says. The one you set up in year 1 using the salvage satellite dish and the signal processing package. A pause. I've been looking for precursor signals, the kind that would have preceded the torrid meteor events. Looking for more incoming spores, I said. Looking for more incoming anything, Omni says. Harrow. And this pause is the longest I've heard from Omni, the longest Omni has taken ever in our years of operating together. I'm detecting a signal. I straighten in the chair. From the deep space antenna, I say. Yes, a signal that is. Omni's processing behind my thoughts. It has a quality I've learned to read as the AI version of something like careful phrasing. Structured, non-random, not noise, not any known terrestrial or satellite emission pattern. A beat. And not consistent with the spectroscopic signature of the original torrid spore carriers. What's it consistent with? Nothing in my database, Omni says, which is a significant statement. The monitors are in front of me. Normal readings, all of them. The world outside exactly as expected. Harrow, Omni says. The signal's frequency and modulation pattern show one specific characteristic that I've flagged as high priority. A pause. It matches, approximately not precisely, but within modeling tolerance, the bioluminescent chemical signal frequency used by the Night Stalker pheromone communication network. The air in the command center is exactly the same temperature it always is, because the climate control runs at 68 degrees Fahrenheit constantly, because Omni calculated 68 degrees Fahrenheit as optimal for cognitive performance. But something cold moves through me anyway. You're saying, I say slowly, that something out there is broadcasting on the same frequency the Night Stalkers use to talk to each other. I'm saying the signal resembles that frequency, Omni says. I'm not saying what it means. I genuinely don't know what it means. A pause. But I know what it could mean. They didn't come from a rock, I said. Not a question. The spores came with the torrid meteorite material, yes. But meteorite material doesn't transmit structured signals. Omni let that settle. Something sent the spores here, Harrow, possibly on purpose. And something out there is now receiving, or sending, in a frequency the Night Stalkers respond to. I sat in the chair, the 22% bright world outside, the slowly recovering sky, the Night Stalkers becoming less, or appearing to become less, or something else, something I hadn't modeled. Omni, I said, can the Night Stalkers receive this signal? My current models don't have data on the upper range of their pheromone communication sensitivity, Omni said. I've been assuming it's a local short-range chemical system. But if there's an electromagnetic component, if the pheromone signaling has a component I haven't measured, they could be receiving instructions, I said. Or information, Omni said. Or, another pause. I don't want to speculate beyond the data. Then let's get more data, I said. I recommend beginning an extended analysis protocol immediately, Omni said. And I recommend the pause, the weight of it. I recommend you think carefully about what we do if the analysis confirms what I suspect. The world outside, 22% light, night stalkers retreating, people growing things in the soil, the signal from the dark between stars. Structured, non-random, familiar in a way that nothing should be familiar. I pulled the tactical UV launcher from its mount on the wall. Force of habit. The same force of habit that made me sleep in the vest, that made me count exits, that had kept me alive through things that should have killed me multiple times over. I checked the charge. Full. And I set it on the desk. I looked at the monitors. All green. All nominal. Omni, I said. Yes? Tell me something, honestly. Always. Are we going to make it? Another long pause. The longest. The processing happening in the mesh and in the servers and in the space between what can be calculated and what cannot. 41 is not 0, Omni said. Yeah, I said. I know. I looked at the dark on the monitors. We've done this before. We have, Omni said. And we'll do it again, whatever we have to. I put my hand on the tactical launcher. Outside, the long dark, the slow light, the unknown frequency traveling across the void between here and whatever sent it. Inside, 21 people asleep, a map on the wall, sweet potato plants in growing rows, and a promise I made to a child who wants to see if the mountains are still where she thinks they are. The signal broadcast from somewhere impossibly far away, and in the command center of a silo in Idaho with an AI that lives in the back of my thoughts and the weight of everything we've survived between us. I start the extended analysis protocol. Because if something is coming, I need to know. And if something is adapting, if the long night was a preparation rather than a conclusion, if the Night Stalkers were a first wave rather than the main event, then we need more time. And time, I've learned, is exactly what you make of it. We've got work to do. End of the endless night. The world ends. Something always comes next. The question is what you built while you still could. The question is what you were in the dark, in when no one was watching except the machine that doesn't sleep and doesn't judge and tells you the truth. The question is 41%. And what you do with it. The endless night.